I know it's a little early. I can go back in there and edit it, I think.
Or make Taylor do it.
We'll make Taylor do it. We'll make Taylor do everything. Oh, see, he can't hear me, so I can say that. Of course, I just recorded it. Taylor, we're going to make you do everything. No, I'm kidding.
And we're grateful, very grateful.
Very grateful.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. So we have Katie here. We have Nate. Awesome. Thanks, you guys. Okay. Now I'm going to try and watch the chat box as well. So if any questions pop up in the chat or something, we can like address them at the end of your section.
Just so we're kind of mindful of it, how much time do we have?
So I have you guys speaking from like I'm probably going to give you guys like 15 minutes. If that's okay, Nate, does that work?
We'll make it work.
Okay.
Including questions.
So for the Disability Law Center, I've got you guys going from 10:35 to 11:15. So you guys have more time.
Okay, so we have about a half hour.
And that will include, right, yeah, almost 45 minutes. And then,
okay.
And then I have COVID brain. I hope this works. And then at 11:15, I'm going to share my bit, and then SAMi is going to be part of that.
So we should plan on we should plan on wrapping up by 11:15, including questions.
Right.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, and then we've got another group coming from the county, and they're going to talk just a little bit, just about like 10 or 15 minutes. So yeah, I mixed them up. Sorry. Like I said, I have COVID brain. So catch me if I'm like way off and left.
Oh, that sounds terrible. I do have a question. Do you usually get a lot of questions from this group of folks, or does it depend on the topic?
I anticipate a few questions for you guys. I think because we've got some that are we've got some that are already have guardianship, and some that really don't want to get guardianship, and they want to be informed of what the other options are.
Okay,
right?
Great. Okay,
So,
yeah, we just wanted to kind of know how we'll plan for a fair amount of question time, and we can fill it if there aren't a lot of questions. That's not a problem. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Yeah, it just depends on where they're at. Some of them still have their kids are in their 20s, and some of them, they're older, they're in their 40s, they're already pretty much set and know what needs to be done in terms of guardianship, but some still have a lot of questions about it. So Yeah, I figure even if we just record it and we only have a couple of parents, we can we can post it, and you guys and we can watch it and you can share it as you need to. So I'll probably usually when I put stuff on our YouTube channel, I have it be what's the word? It's not private, but it's like you have to have the link to see it. Like it's not
It's not like searchable. Or
right.
yeah.
But with this one, I might just post it public. What do you guys think? Are you okay with just posting it public? Okay, and then that way people can search it. Okay, I will do that then. And it's under NextWork Director is the name of our YouTube. Yeah, that particular guys, oh my gosh. Words are hard. We're gonna have it documented too. Look at Amy's COVID brain.
Oh, that's what I've heard from folks that have had it though, is that the mental fatigue is like the worst part.
Oh my word.
If you're vaccinated, and if the illness part isn't too bad, it's the mental fatigue that really sort of gets you.
Yep. And I've been trying to work, because I don't want to use all my leave. And so I've been trying to work as much as possible, but there's only so much capacity here. It's like my bandwidth has severely shrunk. Oh dear. So it'll be interesting, and we'll have it recorded for posterity. Yay! I could be an advertisement for why to get your vaccine. Okay, we'll give it just a couple more minutes to see when people will show up. Is that light behind me? Is that really obnoxious? Okay.
Amy, have you heard from this lady, Wendy Rasson? Has she contacted you?
I did hear from her. Yeah. She was talking about coming, but with the switch over to Zoom, I don't know. Honestly, I did not stay on top of everything as well as I could have if my brain was working.
Yeah, I sent her an email, but it was this morning, so I don't know if she read it or not. But you said you're going to record it?
Yes.
So she can look at it later. Okay, because she didn't answer me, but it's, Saturday. She's probably, doing some other things. Okay.
Yep. And we do have some staff over there at the site. So if parents do show up, hopefully they can be able to see it. So they don't make the trip out there for nothing.
Yeah.
But yeah, we are going to record it and we'll share it out on our YouTube channel.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm here.
You look good.
Thank you. I'm breathing, breathing good. I have COVID brain. So I make no guarantees on intelligence coming from my corner of the world.
Well, we'll match you on that.
I just hope everyone will forgive my scatterbrain.
It's all right.
So. Okie dokie. Well, what do you think? Should we kick it off?
Sure.
Okay. So, welcome so much to our little small group here. I'm glad that we're going to record it though. And I am going to make it publicly available on our YouTube channel, and it's the NextWork Director is the name of the channel. I need to change that. Who wants to look up NextWork Director? Just NextWork. Anyway, I apologize again for any lack of professionalism or COVID brain. Yes, it's real. COVID brain is real. Okay, so we're doing our parent training this morning, and we're so grateful to have the Disability Law Center with us. We've got Katie Cox and Nate. How do you pronounce your name? Is it
Crippus.
Cripps? Okay.
Crippus.
Crippus. Okay, I still got it wrong. Thank you, because I knew I was going to say it wrong. Thank you very much. And then we also have Andrew Riggle with us from the Disability Law Center, and they're going to kick us off, and we're going to start with their discussion about guardianship and other options to guardianship. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys, and then when they're done, I'm going to share my little bit about parent transition.
Yes. Well, we will take it away. Thank you. My name is Nate Crippus. I'm the Public Affairs Supervising Attorney at the Disability Law Center. I'm joined by Katie Cox, who is one of our staff attorneys, and Andrew Riggle, who is our public policy advocate. I'm going to attempt to share my screen because we have a presentation. I hope it works. Let's hope so. Okay, now. Is that actually working? Yes.
Perfect.
Great. So again, so we're the Disability Law Center. We're here to talk a little bit about alternatives to guardianship. And so just to give some quick background on, oops, that's not what I meant to do. Just to give a quick background on the DLC. There we go. So we are the state's protection and advocacy agency. For those unfamiliar, every state has an organization like ours, every state and territory. And so we are federally mandated to exist. And, we envision a just society where all people are treated with equal equity, dignity, and respect. And our mission is to enforce and strengthen and protect the opportunities, choices, and legal rights of people with disabilities in Utah. And so we do that in a variety of ways. We do presentations like this, other outreach, education. People call us. We get about 4,000 calls a year, calls and onlines, I believe, and kind of things coming in through the internet. And so we help people with information, referral, self-advocacy support and training. Andrew and I do a lot of legislative and policy work. But then that, everything we do individual casework, all the way, everything from mediating some things, trying to solve things at a lower level, all the way up through, full legal representation through litigation and even class actions. So we kind of do a whole myriad of things to enforce and protect those laws for people with disabilities across the state of Utah. We are statewide. Our services are free of charge. And with that, I will turn it over to Katie to talk a little bit about guardianship in Utah. Katie, just tell me when you're going to move slides.
Okay, sounds good. I'll have you go to the next slide. So we're going to talk today, about guardianship in Utah and alternatives to guardianship. Happy to answer any and all questions that folks have. We'll probably take those at the end of the presentation, but drop them in the chat as you have them or jot them down. And we'll go through them. I understand that parents attending today might be at various stages of the process, might have children at various ages in adulthood. And so I know that everyone's kind of coming from a slightly different place. So hopefully we kind of hit all those pieces. So the way that our state defines incapacity is what you see on this slide. In order for a court to determine that a limited or a full guardianship is necessary, a person has to meet this definition. And so incapacity is necessary in order for a guardianship to be put in place. So this is kind of a lot of words. What it sort of boils down to for us from the Disability Law Center's perspective is that the most important part is really, can a person understand the information needed to make a decision, and can they express an informed choice? So that might just be like a yes or a no, with or without assistance. If so, then they can sign a contract, they can enter an agreement, they can sort of make decisions. So I probably won't read this whole definition, but just sort of the highlights are, you know, can an adult do some things, even if they're impaired in doing them, even if they require assistance. So it's okay to require assistance. It's okay to have difficulty doing some of these things. But if the person can't do it at all, regardless of help, then if they can't make and communicate decisions and, you know, provide for necessities for themselves or be safe, then that's when, you know, a court might look to a guardianship. So it's a pretty, you know, it's a pretty high standard. And so we really like to think about it like what can a person do instead of what can't a person do. So we'll go to the next slide, Nate. So these are sort of this is some guidance from both the from state law, from the code section, as well as from Utah State Court's guidelines for court appointed guardians and conservators. So this is really just talking about like, what does it mean to be a guardian? You know, what are you doing on behalf of the individual? So Utah law really encourages the individual, the protected person, to participate in decisions, to exercise self-determination, to really be involved in decision making. And as you'll see later as we talk, there are lots of ways to do that might not, you know, we might not be guardianship. And so that sort of don't limit an individual's rights quite as much. And so just kind of going through the options to sort of, so you can kind of compare things along the way. Utah, you know, wants the protected person to participate as much as they can with their ward or with their guardian in making decisions, and their desires and their values should be considered in any decision that the guardian is making. One of the things that the guidance talks about is thinking about the least restrictive alternative. So how do you help the person to be as independent as possible, to do the things they want, to live in the way they want, to associate with whom they want, to be able to have choices about their medical care, where they work, where they live, all of those kinds of things. So Utah courts are really are interested in how involved a protected person is, even if they're, you know, even if they're under a guardianship. So the best option for every person's situation is really focusing on the alternative that restricts their freedom and independence the least. Go to the next slide, Nate. So we've got a few quotes here. So these are all sort of facts and pieces of things from code and guidance. So I'll just generally go through them. So these things are all true about guardianship. I think that there's a lot of misconceptions or misunderstandings, or what is guardianship, what isn't guardianship, you know, what does it mean, what does it do I have to have it, those kinds of things. And so so a guardian has the same powers, rights, and duties respecting the ward that a parent has respecting a child. So that means that even if you decide to share decision-making with your adult child, full guardianship legally takes away their ability to make most choices for themselves. So that's just the legal mechanism of guardianship. As we all know, decision-making can be burdensome. It's stressful. I often get stressed out by decisions, but a few of us would willingly give up the right to make our own decisions. But that's ultimately what the appointment of a guardian does, sort of removes the right of the person to make their own decisions. I would just say that we might not always agree with the decisions other adults make, right? And probably that our adult children make. And it's of course totally okay to disagree with the decisions other people's make, but guardianship ultimately is sort of taking those rights away from an individual. So it's just important to just know that. Guardianship doesn't have to be granted at 18. Guardianship can be granted at any time if it becomes necessary. It's not something that when a person is about to turn 18, that triggers some kind of necessity for guardianship to begin. There are many other alternatives, and it's always important to consider the least restrictive alternative before moving to something as restrictive as guardianship. Let's see, guardianship is rarely needed to continue to play a role in the life of an adult with a disability. Alternatives short of guardianship, if your child is 18 and still in the educational system, you can still play a role in that person's life and on their IEP team. You can participate with them, with their medical providers, all of those things. There are different mechanisms that allow you to continue to be involved in that individual's life. And as I just noted, there are other legal, medical, and financial tools that allow you to make decisions with or for an adult with a disability. We're going to get into those next.
Yeah, so kind of to jump off of what Katie said, obviously, from the DLC's perspective, guardianship it's a big thing. It is, you're saying somebody's, does not have the right to make their own decisions. And so, from us, we like to promote alternatives. Certainly, we respect everyone's right to be involved, and everyone wants to, help their loved ones make good and choices and things of that nature. And we are not suggesting people shouldn't be involved, and certainly if your kid or your brother or your sister, whoever wants you to be involved in those decisions, great. Like that's what they should have the right to do that. And there are a lot of ways to enable people to do that. So we're just going to go through a few of the different types of alternatives out there. And so one of them is person-centered planning. So it's an alternative that really focuses on the individual and puts them in charge of the direction of their life. This is actually a process that if you're involved with DSPD, some part of the waiver, I think this is something that at least they should be using when kind of making some of those decisions about where a person lives, their work and all of those things, and kind of trying to help them make those decisions. It involves the development of a toolbox made up of resources and methods to help a person kind of create their own path. You really just support the person kind of making choices and how to reach their goals. The person is the one really driving this process. Their preferences, goals, strengths, and desires and needs are at the center. And so, it's a really great process. It's not something that, it's something obviously that can work and is being used, to help people make decisions through DSPD. Katie, do you want me to keep going, or do you want to take these one at a time? How do you want to do this? We can do whatever.
That's a great question, Nate. Sure. You can. Do you want to keep on this one, and then I'll do next?
I'll keep going.
Perfect.
And so similarly, there's obviously supported decision making, and I guess this is kind of a similar to what we just talked about. Person-centered planning is kind of the foundation for this. You know, it's designed to allow an adult to make choices about where to live and all of, you know, their finances and all of that. And really, you know, this is the kind of thing that I believe a few states have actually implemented legislation and statutes around this concept. Texas is one, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I hope I'm saying that right. Andrew will correct me at the end if I'm wrong. But you know, this is something that a state could implement and kind of make part of the process. You know, this is one of those alternatives that people can use to kind of support those. You know, increase self-determination, promote self-advocacy, and maximize independence. It really is just a process that enables a person to kind of make decisions, but give them support they need to do so. And so, you know, some examples here that we just want to kind of give are circles of support and microboards are two variations. Circle of support is an informal community of friends, family, and other supporters who work together to promote and support the goals of the individual. They can help solve problems, give advice, you know, ultimately provide the support needed. For example, a church group could be part of a community advocate system and provide support to an individual. A microboard is a committed group of 5 or more people who agree to take on some formal responsibility to help a person make a life plan, advocate for their needs, make connections with the community, things of that nature. With a circle of supports, you know, there's no contract signed. It's just comprised of individuals kind of helping make some of those decisions. With a microboard, a signed contract is there, and the members agree to some of those responsibilities in there. But those are just kind of some examples of how supported decision making could work for a particular individual.
Do you want me to do these, Nate?
Sure.
Okay. So we'll just give a few examples of individuals who have using supported decision making have had success in doing the things that they're really interested in doing. So first, Katie Daly attended a university program, graduated with a certificate in business. College had always been a dream of hers. So her case manager and other people from her support team encouraged her to apply to university. While she attended college, she made friends, enjoyed her mentors. She also worked a job and maintained an internship while attending college. She became more independent while attending college and began using public transportation alone for the first time. She's an example of how supported decision-making can be successful and beneficial. Then Jenny Hatch is a high school graduate with a job, and she worked as a political campaign volunteer. She was eventually faced with a guardianship petition taking away the right to make her own decisions. She was placed in a group home by the court with temporary guardianship as requested by her parents. The group home took away her cell phone, her laptop, didn't permit her to see her friends or help her get to work. But after she went to court a number of times, she was able to win her rights back, and she now uses supported decision-making to choose where to live, who to see, where to work. And this is an example of sort of the continuum of things that can happen, you know, the difference between what a really restrictive guardianship can look like, and then how supported decision-making can really involve the individual in the process. And then the last one is Monica. At the age of 10, Monica was in a car accident and she was paralyzed from the waist down. At 16, she became emancipated from her parents' custody. A few years later, a judge deemed her unable to make informed decisions because of her spinal injury. She was given a full guardian at that time, and that guardian was very restrictive. She was sent to a residential treatment facility, but then during a medical evaluation, it was found that she was capable of making informed decisions. She filed to terminate her guardianship. Her cousin gained guardianship during that time, but there was eventually a hearing and the guardianship was terminated. So those are just sort of 3 different people who, you know, had experiences with just sort of supported decision-making and were able to, you know, be independent because of it. And then I will talk a little bit about shared decision-making as well. So shared decision-making is a little bit different than supported decision-making because it's about two people making a decision together. The shared decision can be between the person and their supporter. It's beneficial because the individual's preferences and values are still being considered, while the other person can provide information and a different point of view. This is different than supported decision-making in that supported decision-making is when an individual uses supporters to help make a decision, whereas this is about two people coming to a decision together. The second person isn't making the decision for the individual, but they're making an agreement about what the decision is. And there has to be an agreement before a decision is made. So this is an intermediate step between supported decision-making and a power of attorney. So, it's a little bit more, you're actually making an agreement with another person, but you don't have a sort of a written document giving that individual permission to make decisions on your behalf. And we'll talk a little bit more about power of attorney here shortly. But shared decision-making is often used in a healthcare setting, an individual and their physician, for example, or for financial purposes. So if, for example, if an individual can make their own financial decisions, but they want to make a purchase that exceeds like a certain amount of money, there could be a plan to come to an agreement with their supporter in order to do that. Next slide, Nate.
Do you want me to start off here?
Why not?
Okay. So I guess I would say that, I think from what we hear a lot from folks is the healthcare setting is one of those places where guardianship comes up a lot. There are a lot of questions about it. And so I do think it's important to note that there are a good number of alternatives in a healthcare setting. I know everyone is always concerned. HIPAA comes up a lot. I frankly think HIPAA might be one of the most misunderstood laws that exist out there. Everyone seems to think it has all these various protections and things it does that it doesn't. The reality is, HIPAA is there to protect the individual. If you want to share your information, you are allowed to choose to do so. You can do that. I think there's this idea that, oh, I can't do that because everyone won't let me. Well, if I want to share my health information with someone, I can choose to do so. And so I think that's just want to make that clarification. So some of those alternatives, just kind of quickly running through, and we'll get into a little more of the specifics of some of these later, as Katie mentioned, like specifically power of attorney. But there's obviously healthcare power of attorney, just a document stating who can make healthcare decisions on behalf of an individual if that individual can't make or express a choice. A healthcare surrogate is a person who is authorized to make decisions on behalf of a person and help communicate their healthcare decisions. They can make some decisions for the individual without having to receive court approval or guardianship. And is usually used in situations when an individual has not created or does not have the capacity to create an advanced healthcare directive. A living will states an individual's instructions and wishes for healthcare related decisions. It does not designate a healthcare agent. With an advanced directive, the agent can make decisions immediately. And based on the preferences listed in the directive, directives can be revoked or modified relatively easily. The agent is authorized to make decisions on behalf of the incapacitated person, even when the situation is not end of life. So Utah statute states that if no representative is selected, the individual spouse or parent, adult sibling, adult child or grandchild, or any other adult who is aware of the individual's preferences can act as a healthcare representative. The disadvantage is that in order to create one, a person must have the capacity to write the directive and assign a healthcare agent. It may also be difficult to make a decision for another person and to truly know what that person would prefer or desire. Similarly, there's the psychiatric advanced directive. This is, a written document expressing individuals' wishes in advance, types of treatment services, other assistance desired during a personal mental health crisis. An individual can grant decision-making authority to another person. It temporarily goes into effect if the individual is hospitalized or until determined to have regained capacity to make decisions. During an emergency, a doctor has the authority to make those decisions.
So do you want me to jump in here, Nick?
Go ahead, Katie.
Or do you
Yep.
want to keep,
Nope.
going?
You take it, go right ahead.
Okay, so now we're going to get into some sort of financial alternatives.
Oh, I fear we may have lost Katie. Well, then I will just jump right in and pick up the joys of Zoom. As Katie was starting to say, financial alternatives are something, again, this is another one of those areas I think that we often hear a little bit about, but there are some good alternatives. Electronic bills, deposits, and payments can be easier for managing finances. Joint bank accounts, and people can just have a bank account together. Most people are probably familiar with that concept generally. They can make it easier to manage cash flow and prevent unexpected expenditures. Trusts are certainly a little more complex. They're legal arrangements between an individual and another person called the trustee who manages their assets. They can help make sure resources are only used for their intended purposes, and a person is provided for over the long term. A special needs trust can also help a person keep SSI and Medicaid while preserving their assets. I know that's incredibly important for a lot of folks. A representative payee is an arrangement that allows a third party to manage a person's Social Security money for their benefit. A financial power of attorney, again, we'll get more into the specifics of a power of attorney shortly, is just, again, a written document that designates another person to manage those finances and describing what actions they can actually take on an individual's behalf. A fiduciary is court appointed, and it's an individual who manages a person's properties and or money. And a court grants a conservator the authority to manage and make decisions about a person's finances and properties. And so a conservatorship is really quite similar to guardianship. It's just related to financial decisions and things of that nature. And we kept saying we would get there eventually, and here we are into a power of attorney. So a power of attorney really is just it's a legal document. It's granting authority to a person as an agent to take action and make decisions in place of an individual. There are no guidelines that a power of attorney document must include. It can be tailored to meet the individual's needs and circumstances. So there's a couple of different kinds of powers of attorney that are worth noting. There's a springing power of attorney and a durable power of attorney. A springing power of attorney becomes active when the individual is no longer able to handle his or her own affairs, whereas a durable power of attorney grants the agent immediate authority the moment the document is signed. So, if you have a durable power of attorney, what you have is something that's always in effect, and it can. Oh, Katie's back. Katie, we're.
Sorry, my power went out for a minute, and then my Wi-Fi was out. So apologies.
No, you're fine. We're on power of attorney. I will give you when I'm done here, you're going to take limited guardianship because I've had to take over unexpectedly.
Sounds great.
And I know you had some thoughts here on durable and springing, so please jump in too, Katie, if you have other thoughts here, because I know this is kind of an important thing. So again, a durable power of attorney is just something that's going to be in effect right when you sign it. So if you have that you can essentially make decisions while that person is, whether or not they are incapacitated at the time, you can just you can make those decisions. Whereas a springing power of attorney goes into effect when a person can no longer handle those affairs, but the person obviously needs to be able to sign that, and I believe they have to be notarized in Utah, I believe. And so, the springing one would go into effect. I know that we have heard examples where a person has a springing power of attorney that goes into effect for a specific amount of time, and then would kind of go out. So again, these can be like individually tailored to various circumstances. But usually what would happen, I think, in a springing power of attorney is that would go into effect and then would stay in effect. So for I think Katie we were having a conversation, we were talking about like for folks on the aging side of things, those make a lot of sense, for where a person may, become ill and become incapacitated, and then somebody would need to take over and be able to manage those things. These are really a beneficial alternative, because you can select who you want to do this, and it doesn't require a judge or doesn't really have to be registered in any way. Again, it's just a signed document that has to be notarized, and they can serve a ton of purposes. You can limit them to financial, healthcare, education, whatever kind of things of that nature. So these are probably one of the, I guess, it's like we said, there's all these steps, kind of what you would use. This is probably one of the stronger alternatives, kind of gives away, the ability to make some decisions, person's ability to make some decisions, but it's a lot easier probably to create than a guardianship. And then Katie, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, I would just say, yeah, I think that the really great thing about a power of attorney is there are so many options and they're so easy, you can really tailor them to what you need. And so it's just important to know when you're creating one, what you want it to do, and then what has to happen in order for it to work, right? So if you have a springing power of attorney that says the person has to be incapacitated in order for it to go into effect, you might need a statement from a doctor saying that the person is incapacitated, which is that's a really good protection. But at the same time, that's why we talk about like with aging adults or something like that, it might take a little bit of time for that to happen. We would also say that, Nate, you may have already said this before I got back, but powers of attorney can always be revoked too. And so that's also really important, right? So a durable power of attorney does go into effect right when it's signed. And so the individual who has power of attorney could exercise it. But if the person exercising it does something that the person who signed it doesn't agree with, and that person still has capacity, they can revoke the power of attorney and be like, and so it's a good, that's the really good thing about a power of attorney is that it kind of protects everyone, right? It gives a lot of flexibility. Okay, and I am talking about limited guardianship. So a limited guardianship is preferred by Utah courts. So what that means is it's granted just for specific needs for an individual. So when we talked about guardianship at the beginning, that's what's called a plenary guardianship or a full guardianship. That's about all the person's rights. A limited guardianship is really just about the specifics that a person needs assistance with. And that would be after you've considered all of the other options, supported decision-making, powers of attorney, all of that. It's sort of a continuum. So we think about sort of the steps along the way. Limited guardianship would be sort of, but before a full guardianship. And that is really what Utah courts prefer. So that is if, there isn't another alternative, look to limited guardianship, because then the individual still has some of their rights. They're just getting help with the things they need assistance with. So they maintain all of their rights except for the rights of the limited guardianship specifically. So that could be, medical, financial, residential, education, habilitation, a limited guardianship can be really, really specifically tailored to any of those things. And so, and really limited. I mean, that's why it's called that, right? So just think about sort of what that means. What does the individual really need help with? Do they need help with managing their finances? Maybe a financial limited guardianship, is the way to go if like a conservatorship, if doing supported decision-making, isn't necessarily working. I don't know, Nate, if you want to add anything there, I think it kind of speaks for itself, the title.
I think it does. I think that's probably pretty straightforward. And so lastly, we just have some resources and links, and we can share a copy of this presentation with folks, because these links probably don't help you on the screen right now, obviously. But we're happy to share this. I think my colleague Andrew was also maybe going to share a few more resources, so I will turn it over to him to do that before we open it up to any questions.
Nate, I just wanted to, before we go on to that, I just wanted to quickly highlight two of the links on the slide that you can't see, and those are the National Resource Center for Supported Decision Making. They have a whole lot. They have a whole lot of resources about how to do this, both in legal and in practical terms on the ground. And Jonathan Martinez, who you might have seen around TV a lot lately, talking about the Britney Spears case. He is the person who started this center, and he's now at Syracuse. So that'll give you some context for that. The other one I wanted to highlight is the Guardianship Signature Program, and that is a program in Utah that uses volunteer attorneys to make sure to try to make sure that individuals facing a potential guardianship or have their own legal representation during the proceedings. So I just wanted to quickly highlight those two. And then Amy, I don't know if it's possible to share my screen, but I will try and see if we get lucky.
So I think I have to turn off my screen sharing, Andrew, or for that to probably happen.
Yes, well, I suppose I could, but it says, so I'm going to do that. Hey, what do you know? It actually works. Life is good. Okay. Let's see. Can everybody? And I don't know if I'm going to be able to hit the tabs because the bar is right in front of it. But I'll just highlight a couple. What I was hoping to do, and if I can move this, maybe I'll be able to.
You're muted now, Andrew.
Because that's right where I put the mouse to drag it, of course. A couple of years ago, the DLC co-hosted a what we called a celebration of self-determination. It was basically a one-day conference on practical alternatives to guardianship, and this page has all of the resources and tools and presentations that were made at the conference. So, and you can find that by going to disabilitylawcenter.org/CSD for celebration of self-determination. The second thing I wanted to, if I didn't close it, but of course I just did. Anyway, I was going to highlight Jonathan's presentation that he made on supported decision making for the conference, but you can find it on the web page. The third one is a practical tool called Charting the Life Course, and that is a tool that anybody can use with anybody who has needs or who wishes to have help with planning their life or making decisions about the direction they want their life to take, or what they want to do in their life, and how they want to do it. And then the other one, and that is from the University of Missouri, I believe. So, and then the next one is, there's Jonathan's. I know what I closed by accident. Before I forget, the Utah Developmental Disabilities Council has a group of self-advocates that they call the Speakers Bureau, and the Speakers Bureau put together a couple of years ago, put together a really great extensive guide on how to do supported decision making from a self-advocate's point of view, and it really has some good easy to use practical tools to take you through understanding the process and making the process work for you. So unfortunately, that's the one that I accidentally closed, but it's a really great tool, and I'll find it again and share it with everybody afterwards. The next one you can find on the conference website again, but it is just a really simplified tool about how to start to think about and use supported decision making in education. Same thing. This is a much more complete but much more complex and involved curriculum from an entire curriculum from Ohio State University about how to make use of supported decision making and person-centered planning in education. The next one is our 2 fact sheets that the DLC has produced, talking about just a really quick summary of basically what you've heard here today from Katie and Nate about alternatives to guardianship and what's involved in being able to use each of the things that we've talked with you about today. Those are available on our website in our resources section. And let's see if I can find the other one. There we go. This is the other fact sheet. It includes it is talking about the guardianship process itself, from the what the guardianship process looks like from the potential protected person's point of view. So if somebody is seeking guardianship of you, this is what the process is going to look like. This is what you can expect when you go to court. These are the kinds of things that the attorneys might ask you, that the judge might ask you. These are the kinds of things that kinds of things that attorneys and judges might find helpful if you were able to share with them when they ask questions, things like that. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen, and among the 2 of us who aren't presenters, see if there are any questions.
Okay. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah, you can, huh? Okay, one of the questions that we have is, if parents don't have any legal documents in place, how can they help if their adult offspring is taken advantage of, specifically like financially or, in some way along those lines?
That's a good question. It's also a tough question. I mean, I think the reality is, if somebody is taken advantage of or exploited in some way, I mean, you can certainly assist that person in contacting the appropriate places. There are a number of things to look to. I think depending on what the specific circumstances are, obviously you may want to contact Adult Protective Services if it's some type of abuse or neglect. I know there are other things to consider. I'm trying to think of some good resources. Katie, who else might we go to with some of them? Like the Attorney General, I think, has like maybe a consumer protection thing as well.
And if it's a consumer issue specifically, like if someone was taken advantage of in like contracting or, something like that, there are also specific legal services like Utah Legal Services, which is one of our partners. They work on consumer issues specifically. And so there are legal remedies to some of those kinds of things.
Also, if the person is a Medicaid beneficiary, Medicaid, what is a very complicated and ugly name, the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, which has in the past focused largely on providers potentially committing fraud in procurement or service delivery, things like that. But they seem to be taking a greater interest in helping individual beneficiaries who may have been taken advantage of, and it's particularly if Medicaid funds might have been involved in that as well.
I would just say that if that sort of thing has already happened, then there are certain things that you can do. But if the concern, I'm guessing the question is coming from the perspective of like, do I need a guardianship or something so that kind of thing doesn't happen? So I would say that having a plan like a supported decision-making plan, is what's going to avoid those kinds of things in the first place, because you're going to be talking about those kinds of issues like, hey, we don't want you to be, confused or taken advantage of in these situations. So if you get a weird, communication, let's talk about it, or let's talk about like large financial decisions, those kinds of things. So it's really about having those conversations ahead of time so that then you're ready to sort of get ahead of anything that might happen so it doesn't happen.
Yeah, we've also heard of a program that we haven't actually used, but we've been interested in, and it's called Green Light or Green Card or something, and it's a program. Well, it's like a training debit card that you can get for your teen, but you could actually, it doesn't matter how old they are. But basically you set aside a specific amount in each budgeted area, and then if they need to go beyond that budget, they have to get permission. So from the joint account holder. So that would be a good option, especially if you've got someone who's struggling to sticking with their budget, and but you don't want to like take over their finances altogether. That way you could almost like force them to to make that decision with you, to to have to discuss the decision before they spend the money instead of after. So okay, let me see. Okay, is supported decision making and shared decision making now legally binding in Utah?
Not right now. Well, I will go ahead and say that. Andrew, do you want to speak to the more specifics of that issue, though?
Sure. Unfortunately, the answer is not currently. It doesn't mean that you can't use it. That you can't use it informally if you decide that is one of that is the best option for the individual or for the family. But it is currently not recognized legally. We are one of our hopes in the coming year is to work with a group of interested community stakeholders to legalize it, as well as to make other improvements to the guardianship and alternative processes that we've been talking about this morning. So
there's a difference also between something being legally binding and something being like recognized legally as a tool that's recommended to use, right? So it's not that you can't use supported decision-making or shared decision-making in Utah. Of course you can. It's just not something that's included in our like guardianship and alternatives to our guardianship statutory language as a preferred practice.
Okay.
But we
And
would love to
then
work
this-
with folks if anybody is interested in pushing that forward.
Oh yeah. Cool. Okay, you also provided 3 examples where supported decision-making worked, but do you have counter examples to show the limitations of supported and shared decision-making?
I mean, I don't
So
think
what
we
are
have
the-
specific.
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess I would say, so I would say to that, I mean, I don't think we have specific examples of like individuals. What I think we could say is, I think through our presentation, what we tried to show is that this is a spectrum. There are a lot of options kind of to think about when looking at alternatives. And supported and shared decision-making certainly are one of those options, but they do have certain limitations. Obviously, as we just kind of went through, that they're not legally binding, there's no statutory language. Andrew and I would certainly like to change that if we could, but you know, that's to be determined. But at the end of the day, then there are other alternatives kind of that do have that take away some of those limitations. For example, you know, a power of attorney. If you want something that is more, you know, legally binding, if you have that, you have a legal document that kind of does give you some of those added protections. And then I kind of see that you kind of step that up to then say, why couldn't it be part of a limited guardianship? And I would say to that, in theory, as part of a guardianship, Utah law does say that a person should be included as, you know, much as possible in making those decisions. So surely it should be. I guess the issue that we would say with guardianship is that, you know, it doesn't have to be, because at the end of the day, that person then, you know, somebody else has the right to make those decisions for that person. But certainly, if a limited guardianship were in place and somebody said, I want to use supported and shared decision making as part of that, that's great. That should certainly be should be done, and frankly, under Utah law, I think it's what is preferred. I just think that it is not often what is probably done for a lot of folks.
I think Nate, the important thing about what Nate said there is that it's a continuum, and you know, we would prefer that you go left to right on that continuum, least restrictive to most restrictive. But if you find that that the initial option that was chosen that is not meeting the individual's needs, as Nate said, there are other options, and just because you initially chose one does not foreclose the others, and just because you chose one does not mean others can't be used simultaneously.
And the court should actually look at whether alternatives were tried prior to actually granting guardianship. As part of the statute and the way it works is the court is actually supposed to look at whether or not there were alternatives tried prior to granting that guardianship. I don't know in practice that is something that is often done. But at the end of the day, that's really what it should, like. I think that's like, as Andrew said, like, you know, try something. If it's not working, certainly, like, we're not suggesting that, you know, if it's not working, that you should continue. But at the end of the day, if you can look at some of those less restrictive alternatives and try those, and then if they don't work, ultimately, perhaps, you know, guardianship would be what is ultimately determined. But at least at the end of the day, you could show that you attempted these things and you gave some effort to trying to support that individual without, you know, rising to that level. And I think that's kind of what we're saying.
In practicality, I think we all know it's easier and, you know, less sort of painful to start anything at the smallest level of intervention we need, right? And then sort of add on instead of going big at the beginning and then trying to back things off. And so just from a really practical perspective, you know.
So, for example, we have one client whose parents have guardianship, and they are excellent guardians, and they allow their ward to make all of their own decisions, and they make their own decisions. They do their own signing. They do so. On the surface, it wouldn't even look like there is a guardianship at all, right? So if it is, I mean, from my perspective, and I don't know everything about it, but if they're that kind of guardian, then it's probably fine for them to have that guardianship. But what might be the difficulties that the child would encounter? What would be the what would be a reason that they might want to back off that guardianship a little bit? Or I mean, you know, if they're doing it right, why change it?
That's a really good question, Amy. I mean, what I would say is if it's the parents that are the guardians, unfortunately, we all age, right? We all get older, a health condition might occur, something like that. And while these specific guardians are willing to work in a really collaborative way with the protected person, that might not be true for whoever might become the guardian in the future. And so that's scary, I think, for everyone, right? And for parents, because if it's really important to them that their adult child has these rights and can make these decisions, they want to make sure that that's true after they're no longer around or can no longer act as guardians. I don't know, Nate and Andrew, if you have anything else to add to that, but.
No, I think that's right. I don't have much, I don't even add.
So I have actually seen that before, where there were really, really good guardians and then they passed away and a sibling took over. What is that process of taking over a guardianship? And does someone have to take over if you have a guardian and then that guardian passes away? Does, you know, is that something that has to happen, that someone has to take over, or what is that like?
And Katie, feel free to chime in, because my knowledge in this aspect of it is somewhat limited. But my understanding is that the guardianship is not terminated unless and until a court terminates it. And so if but it is possible for a guardian to nominate a successor guardian ahead of time that says, you know, if I'm no longer able to fulfill my duties, this is the person, or these are the people that I would like the court to consider appointing after me. And if that hasn't happened, then the court, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Katie, but I believe if something happens to the current guardian and there is no successor guardian in place, then the court will schedule a hearing and likely appoint an emergency guardian until a permanent successor guardian can be identified and has accepted the appointment.
Yep, Andrew, that's exactly right. Yep. Yeah. And so it's, I mean, certainly best practice would be that the court would look to the protected person to understand what, you know, who might be a good person for them to have as a guardian. But the reality of the situation is that, as Andrew stated, a guardian can sort of nominate a successor guardian, like in their will or in other documentation. And so that's really sort of outside the power of the protected person. Things can, you know, get messy. Yeah. If that process isn't put in place, or if a family member steps up and says, I want the job, you know, that kind of thing. So.
Okay, we have a question from Holt. So I'm going to unmute you here, Holt, or ask you to unmute. Go ahead.
Hi. I full disclosure, I'm probably the parent that Amy was alluding to that has guardianship on, and with all due respect, Katie, I kind of disagree in the approach, although I can see where it's like starting small and working big as opposed to having stuff and removing it. part of, to just address this cause, one of the things we did was include a child along with my wife and I as guardians for the limited guardianship, so that under the contingency, if something happened to my wife and I, and as an example, we were on a trip and both were killed in a car accident, someone's already in place there to take that on, and then another guardian could be added with that. And that's part of discussing it with siblings about what you want to do and what the process should be. The part I find really disturbing whenever guardianship versus shared decision-making comes in is it seems to always really be presented as an either or instead of a joint process of sitting there saying, if someone's going to become a guardian, maybe there needs to be some kind of program in place to say, here's how a guardianship can and should work. And here's the process guardianship should work and what it's intended to and not to do. Because quite frankly, there have been times with my daughter's life that we've had to step in educational wise when she was doing her degree, that by having that guardianship, it forced reluctant professors to have to speak with us. And when it was clear that she could no longer advocate on her behalf or hadn't developed those skills well enough to do that, it allowed us to be able to do that very quickly, as opposed to having to continually go back to court to say, well, now I'm having this added on, now I'm having this added on.
Sure. I mean, no, Holt, I think I really appreciate that perspective. I think that that's really important to hear. I guess what I would say is I think that we all completely agree that there should be, right, there should be training programs and there should be opportunities to really do continuing education about what does guardianship look like, how does it work, what should you be thinking about as a guardian. And unfortunately, that because that isn't in place now, it that's why we sort of think of part of the reason why we think about what are alternative ways to do this, but also because, as you know, guardianship simply as a legal mechanism just removes rights from a person. And you know, we all as human people have our rights, and if we can keep them, you know, that's important. And it sounds like I heard you say limited guardianship. I don't know if I misheard, but I mean, again, that's an alternative on the continuum, right? So you didn't go to a plenary guardianship, but to a limited guardianship to be able to help with the things you needed to help with, but also let your daughter retain the rights that, you know, that she could retain. And from the education piece, I would say, you know, every situation is different, and it really is about evaluating what an individual needs, what a family needs. But from the educational perspective, it sounds like having that limited guardianship really helped for you to be able to help when you could. But there are also other ways to do that, right? For your daughter to have given permission for you to speak with instructors and that kind of thing, even if she is over 18. There are other ways to do that besides a limited guardianship. And it's not to say that guardianship is wrong. That's not what we're trying to say here. But what we're trying to say is it seems as though people often don't have a really good understanding of all of the options on the continuum and sort of think it's guardianship or nothing. And so we just really want to have a conversation about, like, what are the options, thinking about the options, and sort of going from there. But I really appreciate your perspective. So thank you for sharing that with us. And I'm glad that you're really thinking about all those things and, giving your daughter as much autonomy as, you know, as she can have.
And if I could just add to that whole, I just actually want to say, I actually really appreciate your perspective. And one of the things Andrew and I are talking about on a kind of a policy level is talking to folks about, you know, they're trying to get an understanding of what's going on in the system, trying to figure out ways to advocate, you know, through legislative changes and things of that nature. And honestly, what you said is actually really, really helpful. And as I think about, you know, guardianship in Utah under the statute, really, like, the person is supposed to be involved to the extent possible, as much as they should. I don't think that's enforced in any way. And I appreciate that, you know, looking at it, like, maybe that's one of the things we can look at, what, you know, how can we expand the trainings or the knowledge that is given to guardians about, you know, how to do some of those things. That's just something that I think, you know, courts could do if they were probably directed to do so. I mean, that's certainly we want to do judicial training and talk to judges as well about some of these things. And so I just really appreciate that perspective, because I think it's helpful in thinking about some of the ways we can not just, you know, look at alternatives, but also just try and improve the system as it exists. So I just want to say I appreciate your perspective.
Thank you. I think it's also important to note that when someone's given a guardianship, they're not just like given a carte blanche and going on. You have to make an annual report of everything over which you have a guardianship. It reaches a point where my wife and I haven't had to make that report for a few years, but for the first 3 or 4 years that it was in place, we were required by the courts to make that accountability to them, to hold us in check, to say, how are you doing? Are you, so that we weren't just absconding with her money or finances. And so there are those things. But I think the greatest thing would be, as you said, to sit there and have some kind of training. So as people are approaching, and I use 18 because that's the legal age. And at 18, things kick in legally that unless you have something in place, or ready to be in place, there's decisions that are taken from protecting your child. And I think that's important. And I'll use, this is just an ugly example. When we first got guardianship, and this was in Canada, one of the motivating factors was a young girl that had some limitations, and a man came in and pretended to be romantically in love with her, but was only so he could live off her disability allowance. And there was absolutely nothing the parents could do about it. And those are situations that do happen, and they may be more rare than others, but I think it's also the idea that no matter how good of a job you do, you're not going to cover every contingency. And I think that's where the idea of saying, here's what the options are, and here's the contingencies that they cover, and the things to get people thinking about potential things, because everybody that's on this thing knows that at any moment we walk away from this room, we can walk outside and be hit by a car or have something else happen that changes our life forever. And have we planned for that contingency?
Right. No, I think that's really powerful and really helpful to know, the perspective you're coming from, and sort of the things you all are thinking about, definitely. And I would say, I think that every situation is unique, and really thinking about, what's necessary, being educated on the issues, and then figuring out, what's a support. And I think, Andrew, were you going to jump in on the reporting?
I was just gonna say, one of the things that we would be interested in talking to folks about is what would be appropriate and workable oversight, because the reason that you haven't had to complete those reports recently is they are no longer required in Utah if the guardian is the parent or co-parent of an adult child with a disability. So there is no formal reporting or formal oversight of guardianships of many adults with disabilities any longer.
And that you are correct on that, but that's also at the discretion of the judge, because
it's not.
It's not.
Well, when we got limited guardianship down here, the judge required that of us when she granted it, and our daughter was of age, and that was something that the judge required, and it was after about 3 years that another judge removed it and allowed us not to. So unless that's changed in the last few years, which it may have, that was something the initial judge put on.
But we would very much like to have a conversation about what would reporting look like that would help ensure the safety and welfare of individuals under guardianship, but also be but also be doable and workable for family members as well.
I agree. And I think the reporting needs to go beyond just the numbers to be able to take a look at saying, what is it you're doing where possible to help them become more independent? So it's
Yep.
not just a simple numbers report, but it's something that shows the efforts that you're putting in or the person is putting in to become more independent.
Sounds great. Okay, I'm gonna jump in if that's okay. We've gone over time, but I believe that this is really important stuff. And maybe, Andrew, maybe what we can do is we can arrange some time. We could do like a focus group or something with our parents and see, you know, what would be a good training for, you know, for guardianship. What would be a good training, you know, and how would that accountability, what would be the best way to follow up with that accountability?
And I know, and we would be happy to be a part of those conversations, but I know the group in the underneath the courts that looks at looks at the guardianship process for the courts is also currently having discussions and has recently put a draft together of a revised manual for new guardians. So this is a conversation that the courts are having as well.
Okay, great. So I'll follow up with you on that and see, you know, if that's a booklet that will be made available, or, I mean, maybe there's a way for us to provide more training for parents in terms of that spectrum, that whole, you know, all of the alternatives to help their adults, children to be successful and independent as possible.
I want to say thank you, Amy, for allowing us to come and give this presentation and you know, talk to everyone. Really appreciate the conversation. So thank you for allowing us to join.
Thank you so much to all of you. And you're welcome to stay on if you want. We've got a small group, but if you need to take off, I understand. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to, let me see who we have here. We have, oh, I want to go to gallery. Hang on. Okay, we have Ellen Kim here, and I'm going to have her talk a little bit first. And it's Adam, right? Fordham?
Yes.
Yay, I remembered your first name. Yay. Even with COVID brain. And so we're going to have Ellen and Adam talk a little bit about SAMi. And what SAMi is, I have to write it down because I forget the acronym all the time, even when I don't have COVID brain. It's the secure, what is it? Maybe I still need you guys to say it.
It's secure, accessible mobile information.
Perfect, thank you. And this is a program set up by Salt Lake County, and we've actually been trying to get our students to sign up for this program. And we've gotten a few of them on, and they also have a barrier relief program right now, and I'm going to have them talk about that for a few minutes before I give my little section of the presentation. So I'm going to turn this over to Ellen.
Yes, hi. Is it okay if I share my screen? Okay, cool. Let's see. Okay, so I guess I'll just show you guys the app first. So like Amy mentioned, so we're from the county, and the county developed this app called SAMi. And the whole premise and the intention behind SAMi is that we wanted to give clients tools to feel like they can kind of facilitate their journey towards self-sufficiency, and, you know, kind of have a tool that helps them manage and store their information in a way that aligns with their goals. So if you log in, this is kind of what the app looks like. And so there's different ways that you can use this app. You can store copies of documents such as like IDs, birth certificates in My Documents. My Resources is a good directory if you're looking for a specific service. So if you just type in like financial literacy, it'll give you a list of providers that provide that service. And then there's different modules where you can store information that you often have to provide at other agencies during intake. And then there's a module for goals. So this is kind of like a pilot project. And since the county wanted to encourage, more clients to engage and use our app, and by getting that feedback, we're able to improve our services. That's kind of where the barrier relief program comes in. Another intention behind the barrier relief program is that, My SAMi is more for your long-term goals. And so we also recognize that clients have more immediate goals, immediate barriers to their goals. That could be like you're about to start a job, but you don't have the tools, or you got an interview, but you don't have the right clothes. So that's kind of where the barrier relief program comes in. And the barrier relief program is a program that provides financial assistance for anyone who signs up for SAMi to address any barriers that are linked to housing stability. So an example of needs that we've addressed are like laptops, ID fees, like bus passes. I know it's starting to get colder, so we've also helped people with like coats and snow boots. It can really be specific to the individual, and that's kind of what we like about the program. It's flexible and it's trying to address that each individual situation is unique. So this is kind of like the eligibility requirements. So once you make a SAMi account and then complete these 4 modules, and then submit a form that basically explains your situation and how we can help you, then we'll be in contact with you guys about how we can help you address whatever barriers that you guys are facing. And the barrier relief program is actually, the funding is going to run out at the end of the year. And so that's why we're really trying to get the word out there. I know like laptops have been very popular with our clients, to help them with schooling, housing searching, or just like finding employment. And so, yeah, I just wanted you guys to know that this program was out there and that, it's the eligibilities, there's no like income eligibility or anything. You just have to be a SAMi account user and then you'll be eligible for these funds. So yeah. If you guys have any questions,
Hey, Ellen, real quick, would you pop back into SAMi real quick? So if you go to My Resources, one thing that we want to make sure that you guys are aware of, we just recently added a whole bunch, because we do this resource system by just reaching out to people. We've got another person on our team who's our human service navigator. So if you call the SAMi line, you'll get either myself in the morning or in the evening, you'll get a man named Kenan, who's been a housing case manager and many things for many, many years. So he's very, very knowledgeable about the system. But that's there to help people to give that human connection if you're trying to navigate. With the resources, he's the one who adds that in by just calling agencies and saying, hey, we'd love to put you in our system. Would you, just what are your eligibility requirements? Where's your, would you give us some of your information so that people can find you easier? And he's gone through and found a bunch of resources for autism. So if you go into the services, I think, because I think actually you guys requested, yep. So we have a whole big listing, and anything that you guys know of that you wish was in here, or any other kind of services that you guys wish you would be able to find a little bit more easily, we can, if you let us know, we can put those in there. So we've got that list. And I think I saw a question in the chat about, so this is through Salt Lake County Housing and Community Development. And so this is a county program, and we license with a vendor who works our software with us. But anyways, Any other questions?
And I'll put our information in the chat box if you guys are interested in barrier relief program. Like I said, the funds are really flexible, so we can work with you to address whatever you guys need. So yeah.
Thank you so much, you guys. I know that we had initially planned on doing this in person. Thank you for being so so flexible. So what I'm planning on doing, as long as I'm able to test negative, I'm gonna try and get tested on Monday, and I'm gonna head back to the office on Tuesday, and I would love to meet with anybody who wants to set up their SAMi account and help them to apply for this, to turn in this barrier relief form. So yeah, just give me a call, and we'll set up some time on Tuesday so that you can get your paperwork in soon. Because since that money runs out at the end of the year, we want to take advantage of that while it's there. So thank you so much, you guys.
You.
Okay, so I'm gonna, does everybody want to do you want to take like a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and I'll do my little spiel, and then we'll hear from Taylor, and then we'll wrap it up with Jared after that. So, okay, so take like a 5-er. Thank you.
Amy, while we're on a break, can I ask you a couple of quick questions, or are you taking a break also?
I was going to take a break also, so
Okay.
I'll be back in just a few. We
No
can
worries.
talk. Can we talk after? You
Yeah,
good to talk
after, I
after?
I just had a couple of questions about SAMi, and
Oh,
so
okay.
I'll touch bases with you after on those after. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so just in the interest of time, I'm going to pick back up, even though not everybody is here yet. And that's the beauty of recording. Yay. Okay, so for my little section here, I'm going to talk about parent transition. And it can be super tricky as a parent. We all know, those of us who have kids, it is not an easy thing to be a parent. Just whether individuals have a disability or not, being a parent is not an easy thing. So I'm trying to find my presentation thing here. It's on my desktop. Sorry, I should have had it open beforehand. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so our roles as parents change as our kids grow up. We have just as much of a transition to go through as our kids do. And a lot of times we don't even really think about that, about the fact that we have changes to go through. So I just want to give you a little bit of history. So parenthood and autism, it's a whole, it adds an extra dynamic when your child has autism. And part of that is because the process that we go through as parents when we're raising our kids, and I'm drawing on my own experience mostly here. Hopefully you all had a different experience than I did, since your kids are a little younger than mine. Most of them, maybe you had a better experience with your diagnosis than I did. But there's two different models of disability. The first is the medical model, and that's where you identify what's wrong. You're looking for a cure, and the language that is used around it is actually, it's very negative. It has a negative focus. The diagnosis is based on observed behavior. So a lot of times, our behavior is a means of communication. And so if for whatever reason, when your kid was 3 years old and they didn't quite know how to communicate as well as their peers, they're going to engage in behavior, because that's how we communicate. And so when a diagnosis was based on that, sometimes, it's very judgmental, right? It's a judgmental means that they use to provide that diagnosis. It's not something that, is like a blood test that they can take and it's very clear and it's like either yes or no. And so a lot of it is subjective, and also because it's the focus on what is, quote, wrong with your kid. And whenever they come from that approach, you're looking for a reason, you're looking for a cause, and it becomes all about blame and guilt and fix it and cure it. And how come my kid isn't normal? And it was such a negative thing for me to go through. And when my Jessica was diagnosed, the refrigerator mom that theory was still kind of hanging on. They were just starting to come out of that, because Jessica was diagnosed in 1997, and that was right at the crest of that tsunami of diagnoses, where there were so many kids all of a sudden that were coming out with this diagnosis. And at that time, the refrigerator mother theory was still hanging on. So I wondered if it was my fault. And everywhere I went, I remember, it was all about, can't you control your child? Can't you? So much of it was just, it felt so judgmental. And so Like it was a comment against me as a parent, saying that I was a bad parent. And around that same time, they came out with that argument that it was caused by immunizations and that there was environmental factors and genetics. And, you know, they're always looking for this, for the reason behind it so that we can avoid it and stop it and cure it. And you know, statistics are interesting and I love reports and statistics, but I think a lot of times those statistics actually feed into this negative medical model that is used, and it really is it leaves a negative feeling. And so I had this all through the years that my daughter was in school. We were always aware of, you know, what she couldn't do, and it was a very negative focus. Then there is the social model of disability, and this is completely different. This is about accepting individuals the way they are. It's about inclusion, you know, and learning how to adapt and being accepting. And the purpose for a diagnosis is to get access to your needed supports. Other than that, the diagnosis it's not a definition of who you are. It's not a negative thing. It's just a necessary stepping stone. And I love the phrase "different, not less" that we get from Temple Grandin. And another thing to recognize is that, yeah, our autistic kids become autistic adults, and there's nothing wrong with that. And you know, when my daughter grew up with this negative pall hanging over her, I guess. And it was really difficult for me to switch out of that approach and to see her, you know, to see her strength and to recognize, and I love this part, autism does not equal inability to learn, develop, or grow. It's just a different pace. And the social model of disability has a much more positive focus. So these are all pictures of my daughter. This is when she was born. I mean, look at that baby. Such a beautiful baby. And she was one of those that had regressive autism. So she was, you know, would look me in the eye. She was starting to talk. She was starting to engage. And then it was like she forgot everything that she learned. And I went through a mourning period. I didn't understand what was going on. At that time, her preschool teachers didn't even know what autism was. And I remember, and I've told this story before, so if you've heard it, I apologize. But when I first took her to her preschool, their policy was to leave the doors open. And I told them, I said, she will run away if you leave the door open. And they said, well, it's against our policy to close the door. We have to have the doors open at all times. And, you know, I'm sure there was a reason for that, but I was like, okay, but she's going to run. And oh no, we'll keep a close eye on her. No, that first day that she was in preschool, she got out of the classroom, left the school. She was halfway down the block before they were able to catch her. And of course, she's this energetic little, you know, 4-year-old, and she beelined it, man. She was running and, you know, like Forrest Gump, she was gone. She was running. And I said, see, I told you that she was going to run. And needless to say, we took her out of that preschool and put her somewhere else because they did not know how to cope with my daughter. They did not know how to take care of my daughter and to meet her needs. And they didn't know how to make it, you know, to change their services enough that they were able to provide that support for her. So that kind of stuff happened all the time when she was little. Because she was right on that crest, they just didn't know what they were doing. And my daughter was the guinea pig, right? They were learning what to do, learning about autism. And my daughter was part of that process. So at least she's, broken the mold so that the kids behind her can get the services that they need. But when she became an adult, I had to switch from that negative focus that we'd had all through school to the positive focus of, look at what a beautiful, strong, adaptive, amazing young woman I have in my home. And it took some time to flip that switch, but it's really important as parents that we do. So these are some dirty little secrets about parenthood. And if you've done the parent gig, these are true. It's easier to do it yourself than to teach your kids how to do it. But if you're doing this all the time, you're doing it wrong. Our instinct to protect our kids will eventually harm them. Kids cry, life hurts, no one can be happy all the time, and sometimes you have to allow pain in order to do the right thing. Our kids are going to experience pain. That's just the way it is. We experience pain. We would rather experience it for our kids because we know when we're experiencing it, we can handle it, we can manage it, and it's awful to watch our kids hurt. But they have to hurt. It's just like we do. They have to hurt. Your kids will complain about you once in a while, and if they never do, you may be doing it wrong. So there's 3 barriers to a smooth transition into adulthood. And these are things that we've noticed with our own clients. I've noticed this with my own children, and not just our clients that are in the academy, but I've been working with autistic adults for the past 6 years now. So most of our clients will consistently choose the easiest option. Oh, whoops. So if participating is not an option, they don't participate. And they always have an excuse for why they won't try something. We hear, I can't all the time. Or we hear, no, that makes me uncomfortable. Or no, that gives me anxiety. No, I don't want to do that. I don't know how to do that. I'm too tired. There's always an excuse. There's always something that prevents them from trying something that's difficult. And I mean, we do the same thing. It's not like this is unique to our children. But as a mom and in my professional life as well, I find that sometimes I let them get away with this because I don't want to trigger their anxiety. I don't want to, I don't want to make things worse. And it is a major concern for me. I don't want to make them so anxious that they're going to melt down or that they aren't going to learn, and finding that fine line is really, really tricky. Because I want to push them, but I don't want to push them to the point that it's damaging. And it's hard to know where that line is. So one of the things that these are ideas that we've discovered on how to combat this path of least resistance. One, non-participation cannot be an option. We have to, we've had to make some changes while we've been doing this program, and it used to be that it was all, well, if you want to do it, you can do it. If you don't, that's fine. But then we had nobody doing anything. People were like, nope, nope. If you give me the option to say no, I'm going to say no. So they do have options, but not participating is not one of the options. And each option that we present needs to be a challenge to them, because inevitably they will choose the easiest option. It is crazy how often, if I can almost predict, I can say, okay, these are the activities we have. This one's the easiest, so that's the one everybody's going to do. And I'm right 90% of the time. I think it's important too to acknowledge their anxiety and discomfort, but remind them that it's not a bad thing, that low levels of discomfort and anxiety are necessary for growth. If they aren't feeling uncomfortable, it means they're not growing, and we want them to grow. And so when you parents get complaints from your kids, know that we're making them uncomfortable, and we're trying to do that in the best way possible. And then we also need to emphasize that failure is not a bad thing. It's an opportunity to learn. So another big deal is learned helplessness. This is something we encounter all the time. And this is because a failure experience plus perseveration. And perseveration is when they replay something over and over in their mind, especially if they've had a failure experience. They tend to perseverate over that. Or if they've done something that they questioned. And I do this too. You play it over and over, and you look at it from every angle, and you analyze it and pick it apart. And but this, if they do that with a negative experience, they end up never wanting to repeat that negative experience. And so it turns into learned helplessness. And they decide, you know, this was a negative experience, therefore I'm never going to try it again because it's going to fail again. So to combat that, we want to point out how unique every situation is. So I tell my students, life is a flowing river, nothing is ever repeated. So nothing is ever going to be exactly the same. And even though some things might be repeated, it's never going to be exactly that situation. And for those that are, you know, think in pictures, this should be an easy concept for them to recognize, because there's never going to be a carbon copy of any experience that they're going to have. You also want to point out every success, especially when a success follows a failure, because the more often that they recognize that they're having successful experiences, the better off they're going to be, and the easier it's going to be for them to recognize that just because they failed in one instance doesn't mean they're going to fail again. And then also we want to recognize their strengths and give them as many opportunities to exercise those strengths as possible. This is another common one that we see almost every day. And this is the drama triangle. And I don't know if y'all have heard of this before, but there's a victim, a villain, and a hero. And often when our kids get into circumstances where they feel picked on, or where something happens and it doesn't go the way they want it to go. And so they will make themselves the victim. They will call their parents and give their parents an opportunity to rescue them. And then, of course, they paint out our staff as the villain. And this triangle happens a lot. So when your kids come to you with a problem, we want you to help the child identify their feelings. And we've been working on that a lot. In our Adulting 101 class, that's one of the big focuses that we have, is helping them to identify what they're feeling, identify their thought about what they're feeling, or the thought about the event, and then they can make a logical decision about what they're going to do with that feeling. And the focus of all of it is to problem solve. They need to be able to solve their own problems. And by the time they finish with our program, that's really what we want them to do, is we want them to be able to solve their own problems, to trust their own ability to solve their problems, so that they don't feel like they always need help, to whenever they encounter any challenge, to think that they can't do it, they're going to fail. You know, all of those excuses that we had at the beginning that I listed, we don't want them to use those excuses. We want them to know that they can do things that are hard. So we want to problem solve with them, listen to them, but don't give suggestions unless they're absolutely stumped. We want the suggestions and the problem solving to come from them. And we have to be patient with it, because it may take them a while and it's not something they're used to doing. So they need to identify what they can do about the problem, and encourage your child to self-advocate with someone besides you. And that's what our staff is here for. We want them to learn to self-advocate. And when they self-advocate with us, we will try to problem solve with them. We'll say, okay, so what are you going to do about this? How are you going to fix this? Rather than stepping in and saying, well, I'll take care of it. And as a mom, I do this too. I mean, I'm preaching to myself here. Even on a professional level, I need to do this more. I need to focus more on allowing your kids to problem solve and not offering a suggestion for them. We want them to gain the confidence to know that they can solve their own problems. And then you self-advocate it's still important to do. It's still to say, hey, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm struggling with. That's really important for them. And if they aren't doing that, we really try to encourage that. So passing the torch, this is, you know, teaching your child to manage their own lives. And Taylor is going to touch on this a little bit, on this expanding their opportunities for self-advocacy. And these are just some examples on things that we can do. We can practice with our kids from the time they're just to help them to learn self-advocacy and to help them to learn to accomplish things. And once this is really important, don't do for them what they can do for themselves. Once they've proven their abilities, if they self-advocate a need, then you can do stuff for them as an act of service, as long as they know that that's what it is. This is an act of service. I know you can do this on your own, but I'm going to help you because I see that you need it this time. And then you encourage them to serve as well. So that service is another important thing that we really try to give our students opportunities to serve and to recognize the influence they have on their community. Some things that can help them take on responsibility. We talked about SAMi, and I really love this program. The more I use it, the more excited I am about it, and the more I believe that it really is one of those linchpins in helping your kids to take over their own case management and to take over that administrative portion of their adulthood. Medicaid is another one. We're going to have a little event on the 15th and 16th of December. So those are the last 2 days of classes for this term. And we're going to have some Medicaid navigators over at NextWork that will help people to apply for Medicaid if they haven't got that service already. And they are instituting these navigators. This is kind of a training thing for them. They want to have people available from Medicaid to assist people with disabilities with their annual review and stuff like that, so they don't lose their Medicaid coverage. And that's something that we have seen often if they let that Medicaid lapse. It's really difficult to navigate the Department of Workforce Services, their website and everything. And so Medicaid is developing navigators to help individuals with that process. We also have a partnership with the home clinic, and they have case managers that can help your kids with their health care. So one of our ideas is, we set up our clients on SAMi so that they can have all of their information in one place when they need to apply for any additional services. We help everybody get on Medicaid. We help everybody participate in the home clinic if that's something that they want to do. And we highly recommend that because they have a case manager that they can call and talk to at the home clinic. And that person will help them with any medical questions or any psychiatric questions that they might have. Because the home clinic provides health care and psychological care. So they have your primary care physician and they have a therapist there on site that will work with your kid. And then they also will refer to any specialists that you might need. So they work with all of it's U of U Medicaid. And so they would be able to work with any of the doctors at the university with all of the specialists and stuff that they have there. And they also can work with dental referrals. We also recommend, programs like NextWork where they can have somebody to work with them, like a case manager, to help them with their applications and stuff like that. And benefits counseling and setting up an ABLE account are two more things that are really important. So some of the things that we teach at NextWork, and you've heard these before, we teach grit. We want our students to accept responsibility and to make sure that they can do what needs to be done even when they don't want to do it. And that, that's what adulthood is. And having grit, that's what's going to get them through all of those failure experiences. And also the same with growth mindset. That's the ability to take on their challenges. And part of our Part of our mission statement is challenge your limits. Don't limit your challenges. We're always encouraging our participants to grow, to not be rigid in their thinking, and to not cling on to their cognitive, the things that they're holding on to in their negative thought patterns and their beliefs that are underlying that are going to get in their own way. We're trying to help them to recognize those cognitive distortions and move past them. We also really try to teach self-advocacy. Part of that is recognizing your needs, naming your needs, disclosing your needs, and requesting necessary accommodations. And then self-monitoring is a big one as well. Because if they can manage their emotions and their thoughts, then they can manage their behaviors. And that is what's going to help you to be a successful adult, is when you can manage your behavior. So that's those are the things that we are really emphasizing with our students. And I'm sorry I breezed through that really quickly, but I wanted to make sure that that everybody has time. I want to make sure that Jared has enough time at the end. We don't want to nip his presentation, because we all love to hear from Jared. So I'm going to turn the time over now to Taylor. And if you guys have any questions on any of the stuff that I shared, email me. We can make appointments and we can talk about stuff, and I'll let you guys know about the appointments with Medicaid that we're going to set up soon. And so now I'm going to turn the time over to Taylor, who just won an award from the Utah Developmental Disabilities Council. His award was the Self-Advocate of the Year award. And he's even got a plaque and a trophy, and it's, it's way cool. So, we have a hand. Yes, John. Oh, they're applauding. Yay. Okay. Okay, Taylor, I'm going to let you take over, hon.
Hello. So I'm going to talk a little fast because I did not end up with as much time as I thought I would. Here's my trophy and my plaque. They did not have to go that far. I was pretty shocked. I was like, a trophy and a plaque? Are you kidding me? That never happens. I was expecting a piece of paper or something, but no, this is pretty cool. Anyways, as you probably guessed, my role here, Amy was assuming the parent with an autism role, and me, I am here to offer the child's perspective. I was diagnosed with autism at age 3, as I've probably told some of you, but to those who don't, I'm going to share a little about that. I was diagnosed at age 3 because I was, like Jesse, developing pretty normally as a kid. Heck, my dad said I was reading ketchup bottles at age 2, and he's like, wow, this guy's going to be an astounding reader. He's going to be so smart. And then all of a sudden, bloop, age 3 comes, eye contact's gone, speech is gone. It's like somebody pushed a giant reset button on my life. It scared mom and dad. I had to be life flighted. I'm sure it was a scary experience. Obviously, I'm too young to remember it, but I know for them it was not easy. Some struggles I've had to go through my life includes getting kicked out of several preschools. I've been handcuffed to the principal's chair because I punched a girl in the broken arm due to a temper tantrum trying to run away from my teacher. Suicidal ideations were a thing. I hated myself. I was like, if I can't fit in with kids, what's the point of living life anyway? That was hard for my parents to take, I'm sure. I got sent to the Washington County Youth Crisis Center, had to stay a few nights there, which is basically a prison for kids, to put it simply. I was tossed back and forth between special education and standard, and I even had to deal with academic probation in college, which that one wasn't because of behavior. That was because my Tourette's kicked in. I didn't know how to handle it yet, and I had to leave classes early, and I was already past the deadline of dropping the classes, so I had to get put on probation, which was not great. So despite all this, that is obviously now beneath the surface. You guys don't see me as this person who's dealt with all these struggles anymore. Some accomplishments I've had are exceptional progress in the Heart of a Warrior Award. I got Eagle Warrior recognition at my high school, which is where they put your name under this Eagle Warrior statue. I got the High School Spirit Award, the Dixie State University Spirit Award. The Self-Advocate of the Year that's now. And some activities I've gotten to participate in is I was a school mascot. I was on the basketball team. I got to be a varsity women's basketball coach for a couple of years. And I also managed to get my bachelor's degree in human development. So despite all my struggles, I did manage to excel. So one topic that, my main topic is basically, it has a title. It's called Choosing Your Hard. Everything in life, as Amy's kind of already explained, there will always be a hard at some point. As parents, it may be easy to want to make things as easy as possible for your kids because it's easy to say, oh, my kid's been diagnosed. This is not fair. Why should they have to deal with this? Why should I have to deal with this as a parent? It's crazy. So our natural inclination could be to make things as easy as possible for them and you. But the truth is, if you take the easy route now, things are going to get hard later, whether you like it or not. There's this little poem I have found. I have to give credit to Andy Frisella. He is a public speaker and coach that I listen to for motivation. And even though I'm a pretty successful adult now, I still have mentors I look up to. Some I know personally, some are just through podcasts that, kind of give me a dose of reality. And Andy Frisella is that dose of reality I listen to. He is not for everyone, but if you need like a punch of reality, I do recommend him. So anyway, this poem says, marriage is hard. Divorce is hard. Choose your hard. Obesity is hard. Being fit is hard. Choose your hard. Being in debt is hard. Being financially disciplined is hard. Choose your hard. Life will never be easy. It will always be hard, but we can choose it. One example of my life where we really did have to choose a hard was fire alarms. I was not very good at handling those. I had a very overactive reaction system in my brain where if the fire alarm went off without even listening to the teacher and realizing it was a drill, I would freak out and panic like, oh my gosh, this is chaos. I don't like this. I'm going to punch a few kids just to show how upset I am. I'm going to run away. I'm going to, millions of things. But instead of just simply telling me every time that, hey, there's going to be a fire alarm today, we're going to start with that and then eventually wane you to learn that you can handle this. So my first IEP plan was, with connection to the fire alarm, was Taylor will be informed if there is going to be a fire drill that day, so he could plan ahead mentally and figure out what he needs to do. By my sophomore year of high school, and this wasn't my parents, this wasn't my teachers, I said this because I wanted to take the next step. My parents always encouraged me to challenge myself, so that's what I did. I told them, okay, now that I have learned I can handle a fire alarm if I'm told ahead of time, now instead of telling me the day of, tell me if it's going to occur within the next 2 weeks. So that way I can, stretch the amount of time I need to know that's going to happen. And then by junior year of high school, I said, don't inform me anymore. I need to figure out how to get through this. Heaven forbid if an actual fire drill does happen, but luckily it didn't. But I needed to learn that because one day there will be a real fire situation I might have to deal with, and people aren't going to be able to inform me that. You can't predict that. Was that hard for me? Yes. Was it hard for my parents? Yes. They would rather tell me all the time. Sorry, I realize the better example is the driving. I don't drive to this day because I have Tourette syndrome. When I first heard that, it was tough. It was very, very tough. I would ask mom to just drive me to school or drive me to work. But luckily my mom said, nope, if you're not going to be able to drive, you're going to have to learn to walk, and you're going to have to learn to use the public transit system. and you're going to have to learn to use Lyft and Uber if the public transport system is closed. And as you probably can imagine, I screamed at her. I told her, this is not fair. Why does my younger brother get to drive to work? Why does my younger brother get to drive to school? That's going to make me have to work harder. I'm going to have to take more time to get to school. She's like, well, that's just your reality, dude. I'm sorry. My mom, I'm sure, felt bad, but she knew if she just drove me places, it wasn't going to teach me any independence. I was always going to want someone to drive me to work, to school, to the grocery store. But thank goodness for that, I now was able to move from St. George to Salt Lake City. I was able to be okay. My parents live in different towns than I do, but because of things like that, I am right here right now, working a full-time job, living on my own, paying my own finances, and life is good. So where I'm trying to make the connection with choosing your hard is it can be easy right now to just protect and make things easy. But if you do that, then there's going to come a day where, I know we like to ignore this, but it's a reality of life. We will not always have each other. Parents and children, we won't always have each other. That's a fact of life. If we don't make things hard now so that they can learn to deal with hard things later, the hard thing that's going to happen is you're going to have anxiety as a parent, like, okay, when my time is up, am I going to know my kid's going to be okay? Is he going to manage his own issues? Is she going to know how to defend herself if somebody tries to take advantage of her? Is she going to notice the signs that she needs to, etc.? You get the point. It's just, so of course, the point of this is, why not start hard now so that they know how to deal with hard things later, so that you can rest assured the kid's going to be all right. Find the right services right now. That's hard. We know how hard a social security application is. Everything in government's like, oh, why can't this just be easy? They can't make this easy, can they? But those protections are going to get them set up. I was on SSI for a while, and that SSI allowed me to work part-time while going to college. And if I didn't feel ready to work while going to college, I still had some income coming. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't have been able to go to the U, because my parents lived in St. George. And if I can't work a full-time job, how could I live on my own and go to college? That SSI made it so I could. But now I don't have it. I don't get cash payments. I'm still technically an SSI recipient. So if anything goes wrong, I have that, safety cushion. But obviously the goal is, I don't need that. I don't want it. I want to make my own money. I want to have no limits on how much I can make, and so on and so forth. And then, so my last topic, I've got 7 more minutes, self-advocacy, why it's important. I obviously don't need to go over the definition of that because Amy took over that part of it, but just, listen, like she was saying, listen to your kids. Don't tell them what they can or can't do. Don't make decisions for them as best you can. I know one thing I often did as a kid is I would always ask my dad, what do you think I should do in this situation? Because, hey, being with autism, protective teachers, protective mom, protective dad was protective at times, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be, anyways. For a while, dad would help me. He would say, okay, if you do this, this is gonna happen. If you do that, this could happen. But when I turned 18, he shut that off. He started to say, what does Taylor think he should do? What does Taylor want out of this? What does Taylor think is gonna happen? And I hated it at first. He was like, just tell me, I don't wanna do this thinking. I'm scared, Dad. Don't you get that? I'm scared. But he knew I needed to learn to figure this out on my own. If I don't, I'm never gonna be independent. I'm always going to have to ask somebody to tell me what I need to do. And if I had followed that, I wouldn't be right here, right now, living in Salt Lake City. And that's another important thing. If I followed every piece of advice that my parents, my teachers, and my friends told me, I would probably still be working part-time. I probably would still be not living on my own. I probably would still be living in St. George, wondering if I'm ever going to be important, because my parents really pushed me to think outside the box and to challenge myself and to not just always take the easy road. I'm able to be where I am now. There would just there were times I had to be, and that's the thing, we have to remember, it's just advice, it's not facts. We all have heard advice that we choose, like, hey, that's actually a great point. And there's also some where we say thank you and then move on, because it could be limiting. We have limiting beliefs, and that could come between parents and us. We want to reduce the limits as much as we can and stretch the rubber band, so to speak. Sorry if I seem to be flurrying. I got kind of thrown at. Time didn't exactly go as planned. But the core message I just want you guys to get out of this is let your kids have power in their own life. Be a support. Try not to be, do your best to not make this a dog on a leash kind of situation. You got to let your kid get out and deal with hard things. If I've made financial mistakes, I've had credit card debt that I'm still building to this day. If my mom initially did want to just have control over my finances because she was afraid of this, but she knew in her gut that if she did that, I would never have to learn to recover and learn from the mistake. We all learn from mistakes. The last analogy I want to is the bike. We start out with training wheels, and then once the kid seems to have a handle on the training wheels, then you take the training wheels off. That doesn't mean that there's going to be 100% chance the kid never falls down and scrapes his knee or his elbow. But that's how you learn. That's a natural consequence. The kid is going to hurt himself, and one of two things is going to happen. They're going to learn to be more careful, or they're going to learn they don't want to touch the bike again because they're afraid of getting hurt, which is where you as a parent should push the kid. Don't give up yet. It happens. We've all fallen down. Get back up and try again. And you might even get some backlash at first. But one day that kid is going to be grateful that you did push them to keep riding the bike. And it's going to open up a world of possibilities for them. And that bike analogy is just adult life and raising your kid in general. There's no easy way, but if you deal with the hard times together, that kid is going to be grateful and is going to flourish. If you just say, oh, you don't need to ride that bike, it's okay, I don't want you to hurt yourself again, that kid's never going to learn to ride the bike. And that bike is life. Anyways, that's kind of sums up what I was going to say. Thank you.
Well, I could just say amen to everything Taylor just said and everything everybody else has said, and amen to the concerns the parents have expressed. And we could be done. And I'm standing here between you and your lunch, and so now I'm feeling a little bit worried about that. But now they asked me to come, and I will try and make sure we get this through fast enough. But I'll also be very willing to send out my slides. I wasn't sure if this was going to be one of those conferences where I had a few minutes waiting for people to get into my session or whatever. And so put together a little music video and some other stuff that you guys can watch if you want the rest of it. But yeah, just building off what everybody said, I want to take a little bit here to talk about the dignity of risk and the importance of the dignity of risk and that balancing act between dignity of risk and desire to care. And the butterfly here is purposeful, there's something that they found. And as you've ever watched a butterfly break out of a chrysalis, if you try to help it do that, it will never develop its wings to be strong enough to fly. It will be permanently disabled. And the same thing with a bird trying to break out of an egg. If the chick is helped to break out of the egg, it won't be strong enough to be able to survive as a chick. And as much as we want to help, sometimes too much help can actually end up creating harm, especially in the long run. And it's something I've seen. I've been working obviously for almost 20 years with adults, especially with autism, but with other neurodiversities as well. I'm a program director at Scenic Academy down in Provo. We're a residential school for 60 plus adults with autism and other neurodiversities that's trying to help them to learn to be able to be successfully independent. And it's incredibly scary and incredibly challenging and incredibly rewarding. You get to teach at UVU. I'm part of the Disabilities Council. I'm the chair currently, but Taylor, I didn't actually get to vote on your award, so it's not part of my job. But I'm glad you got that, and I was able to help get the plaques, though. So I'm glad you like the plaque. But I'm also a father of 3 neurodiverse children myself. I have a daughter with OCD and severe ADHD, who just started college down in Southern Utah. I've got a son with autism spectrum and severe depression, and then another son with anxiety and ADHD, and I don't know what all he has, but he's only 13, so we'll figure it all out. But so I've been on that side of it as well. And like Taylor, I'm also autistic, and have had to have that life experience. And so today, again, what I want to focus on is just briefly trying to illustrate the dignity of risk and why it's so critically important. And why we often overlook it as caregivers, and then how to try and balance that. So I want to start off with a couple quick riddles. And again, given this format, I don't know if anybody wants to answer, that's fine. They're kind of rhetorical, and yet I had an audience here, we'd be going through it. First one though is, what do you call a place where you always have 3 meals a day, clean clothes picked out for you, full daily schedule decided for you, and you can only go where other people take you, use screens with permission, talk to other people you're allowed to talk to, and do the work other people choose for you? You don't get to choose your food or manage your money very well, but you're always watched over and kept safe as much as possible. Any guesses what that word is in English? That's a prison. Okay, that's how prisons work. We have another word in English too. It's a word for someone who is absolutely safe, never has to worry about getting abused, exploited, hurt, embarrassed, harassed, offended, disappointed, or made fun of, doesn't have to worry about injury, accident, other people around them, money, finances, relationships, transportation, housing, identity, education, illness, ill health, employment, or failure. Any guesses what we call that person? It's deceased. Okay. And yet, as parents, this is, again, we want to take care of our kids. And as those who are caregivers, we really want to take care of the people that we're over who we know have disabilities. And yet, as you reflect on your own life, you can use the little hand raising thing if you want, but just think about this. Who here has ever made some choices you wouldn't want your mom to know about, or that you weren't proud of afterward, or signed a contract, maybe even for a very large amount of money or a 30-year mortgage without understanding every part of the fine print, or made a purchase that turned out to be a total disaster, or got hurt doing something really simple like just trying to walk to the bathroom or mow the lawn, gotten hurt in a relationship or made terrible relationship decisions, or done or eaten something unhealthy, maybe even ruined their appetite several times, gotten ticketed or fined, or hassles with the police, or jaywalked or trespassed, or been late on paying a bill, or on and on and on. We, all of us, have done these, right? And we can look back, and some of those still hurt to this day, and some of those we still regret to this day, and some of them we can laugh at now, and some of them we can share in stories, and some of them we wouldn't tell anyone about because they're still so shameful or embarrassing. But hopefully we also learned something. And the bottom line is, we, all of us, should have guardians, right? I mean, really, there's just a lot of problems we've had that could have been avoided if someone just made all these decisions for us the right way. And yet life is risk, right? How many risks have you taken in the past week? How many risks have you taken today? Right? Any situation where you made a decision that could have some long-term costs or result in emotional or physical harm or embarrassment, or could have maybe even got us injured or killed, right? Think about it. Just this year, 2021, we've had over 25,000 people seriously injured on the roads, and over 280 people have died as a result of automobile accidents in Utah. And yet, how many of us are planning on giving up driving? And if you're Taylor, how many people would still be willing to drive if they'd be given that chance, right? I'm an autistic adult that hates driving, and yet I have a driver's license and I do use it, but I hate the fact that I have no control over the other drivers whatsoever. There's a lot of things out there that are constant risks. And yet, even if we just chose to stay in our house all the time, the experts are telling us that big earthquake's coming at any moment and we all could get collapsed on, right? You know, we don't know. And so therefore, we have to allow ourselves and others the dignity of taking risks and of dealing with and accepting those risks, right? Every aspect of your life has a risk. And all of us have a right to make choices. Some of those choices are going to mess up and they're not going to end up well. And yet we have a right to fail if we have a right to be free. And it isn't that failure. And in learning from those failures, it's the fail and analyze that, adjust, try again, that cycle that leads to success. We can't rise more than we risk. The bigger risks we're allowed in life, yeah, the bigger failures we can have, but also that's where our greatest successes come from, and everything involves risk. So our job then as caregivers, as parents, is to make it safe to fail as we train people to fail, and then to gradually learn to let go. Again, I love this parent here, you know, who has her daughter totally bubble wrapped and she's got the umbrella over her and everything else, because we all feel this way, right? So often we just don't want this person we care about to get hurt. And yet, having seen parents with that umbrella, that metaphorical umbrella all the time, two things happen. One, the child never learns what getting wet feels like. And so they don't know why that umbrella even needs to be there, and they start to resent it. And then second, they also never learn to hold their own umbrella. So if you think about your favorite stories, right? Think about your favorite stories. It could be historical, could be fiction. Go in there and take all of the risk away from the characters, right? So as a child, one of my autistic obsessions was Lord of the Rings, and I read it religiously, and I mean that literally. And so I read it over and over, and yet, you know, if the whole book was like, Frodo goes, wow, hey, I got this ring, and Gandalf was like, whoa, hey, that ring is really bad. That's the Dark Lord's ring. We need to destroy it. Here, give it to me. Let me whistle for my eagles, and we're just going to fly it over the volcano and drop it in. Shoo! That's a really boring story, right? It's the risks, it's the challenge, it's the conflicts, it's the mistakes, it's the trials, it's the falling down, it's the getting back up that makes the story there. I grew up really poor. I grew up in a trailer court with a family of 7, most of us with autism. And really, I could go on and on about it, but I won't. But I will say, one of the things when people are like, well, how did you turn out this way? Right? I can't point to a lot of things, but one of the things I can point to is that from the time I was very little, my parents allowed me to make a lot of decisions that in retrospect were probably pretty stupid, but I was allowed to do it and to learn from it. And I had people who were there to help me that I knew that if I screwed up, I could talk to, and that would help me through the next piece. But I was allowed to go start getting a job when I was 7. I went down and talked to the laundromat owner down the street from our trailer park because, you know, I kind of liked the smell of the dryer sheets and everything, and I knew I needed some money. And he said, well, can you push a broom? And I was sweeping up all of the dryer lint and starting to learn how to clean out dryer things. And it was probably totally illegal, and I was getting paid under the counter and also any of the change I found on the floor. But it taught me so much. And my parents found out about it, and rather than getting me in trouble, they were like, wow, this is so great. You want to work, and let's talk some to the owner. And then they moved me to a paper route after a few months, which was another great experience. And I could go on and on about the things they allowed me to risk that really are so important. And those risks and the responding to those risks, and especially responding to my failures that have come from some of those risks, have made all the difference in my life. Did I enjoy it at the time? No. But would I trade that? No. And I don't think any of us would. So here's the concept, right? The definition of dignity of risk is the idea that self-determination and the right to reasonable risks are essential for dignity and self-esteem, and so should not be impeded by excessively cautious caregivers who are legitimately concerned about their duty of care. So that's like one of the legal definitions, but this is the cornerstone of the self-advocacy movement. When the Developmental Disability Act was passed in 1963, and this is what became ADA and some of these others, It made the radical assertion that disability is a natural part of the human experience that does not diminish the rights of individuals with developmental disabilities to live independently, to exert control and choice over their own lives, and to fully participate in and contribute to the communities that they live in all of the United States. People with even the most significant disabilities are capable of independence, self-determination, productivity, integration, and inclusion in all areas of community life. We write this stuff and we read it and we go, wow, that sounds great. And then our own child wants to do something and it freaks us out. And I understand that. I could go on this whole time talking about my 16-year-old and the wonderful experiences we've had letting him learn to drive. But he's driving now and it's crazy. But I'm going to let Max Barrows, and we think we got the audio working on this. Max Barrows is an autistic self-advocate in Vermont who works professionally for several agencies there talking about disability issues. And this is him on the dignity of risk and the importance of allowing risk in our work as caregivers.
One thing that is really big in self-advocacy and the work that I do, and we discuss it a lot, is the dignity of risk. The dignity of risk is the opportunity and the right to make mistakes. It's one thing to be told things through lecture, but how else can you learn if you don't make mistakes? Life is about learning from the mistakes you make. I appreciate, and we appreciate, protection from people, but please don't protect us too much or at all from living our lives. We are going to have to encounter failures through decisions that we make. But the way to conquer that is to get up on your feet, brush yourself off, and learn from that, because people grow by encountering failures and making mistakes in their life. It's really the #1 way of learning, of where lines are drawn, and also it helps with learning about yourself. The dignity at risk is one of many opportunities that people with disabilities deserve to have. It's one thing just to give them like only a select few, but clearly, even saying in the Americans with Disabilities Act, people with disabilities deserve to live their lives with no limits of opportunity. It really opens the doors for people with disabilities to really discover what is out there and to take advantage of what is out there and not be limited to only certain things due to the overprotection that people with disabilities unfortunately have to live with.
All right. So again, even if you can accept, the whole dignity of risk concept, it's still scary. It's still difficult. And we hear horror stories, right, of people with disabilities who terrible things happen to them. But I'm going to tell you this as well. Horrible things sometimes happen to neurotypical children. Over and over and over again, this is just the reality of life. And the reason all of us can walk today, if we're able to walk, is that somebody allowed us to get out of our crib and to fall down and hurt ourselves over and over and over till we got good enough at falling that we could walk. And like Taylor said with the bicycle, someone allowed us, if we can ride a bike, to fall off and scrape our knee and scrape up our hands and hit our head and possibly get hit by a car. I had a coworker's fiance get hit by a car last week on her bike, and it's the scariest thing in the world. And yet, this is life. And these things are going to happen regardless of ability or disability. And we also say this, I've seen many, many, many adults with guardianships who have terrible things happen to them. And one of the most terrible things that can happen is to have nothing happen to them. You think back to Finding Nemo and how Marlin wants to just stop anything from happening to Nemo. And your heart breaks for him, and yet he has to realize that not letting anything happen to Nemo is not a good plan. Why are we so afraid? Well, because we've seen our kids at their worst, right? We've seen those moments where it's just like, there's this person, I love them to death, but I'm never going to feel comfortable with them doing blank. They're going to just be a sitting duck for people to do this, this, and this to them, for exploitation, for abuse, for all of these terrible things. And yet over and over again, the research is saying that we're overly pessimistic. Over and over again, they're saying that even people with intellectual disabilities can lead very high qualities of life that no one thought possible when they were young. And I'm happy to share that research if you want. Now, I'm not trying to discount fears. They're 100% real, and we do need to address them. And there are times that we are going to have to take some pretty significant actions, but our kids are going to grow up. Are we going to let them? And are we going to be able to let them go when we need them to be able to care for themselves? Now, the reality is the stats are pretty staggering, right? I mean, if you look at the stats, not typically developing young adults, right? So those with autism and other neurodiversities struggle more with having the skills, having friends. Many of them have to live with their parents. And yet so often the parents' plan, when I talk to parents, they all joke and they say, well, my plan is to just not die. And that's funny, but it's also not a plan. And so then it's like, well, maybe my sibling, their sibling will take care of them. And that's 39% right there in the research. But what is our plan? And wouldn't it be better, even if someone has to help take care of them for the rest of their lives, if they could do as much as they can for themselves? Isn't that really the quality of life we want for them? Because one of the things I want to point out is that there is nowhere in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is where autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, processing disorders, and all this stuff come from, that says that you can't become an independent, successful adult. This is Donald Triplett. If you don't know his story, there's a documentary coming out on PBS called In a Different Key that will be coming out soon, and you should totally watch it. And it's by my friend Karen Zucker, and it's good stuff. Donald Triplett is the very first diagnosed case of autism. He was 5 years old. The year was 1938. And Donald met Dr. Connor, who came up with the diagnosis. Donald was autism because autism is defined off of Donald, okay? He's the guy who would spin himself. He liked spinning objects. He didn't make any eye contact. He didn't connect with adults. He didn't listen. He didn't obey. He made weird noises. He liked to line things up. He wrote letters in the air with his fingers. He assigned everybody numbers in place of names, which was kind of unique to Donald. And he just didn't hit the milestones that his peers did. And at age 3, doctors told his parents that Donald is hopelessly insane. When Dr. Connor met him, he was in an asylum. And this institutionalization, again, hasn't changed a ton, even though we do our institutions differently now. Anybody meeting Donald would know, hey, this guy doesn't have a lot of hope. And Donald, of course, is before early intervention, is before ABA, is before all of these things that we now have that can help people with similar disabilities. This is Donald today. He's still alive. Mr. First case ever of autism is still alive. He still lives in the exact same town. He graduated high school. He graduated college. He was a fraternity member in college. He's a retired bank teller. He lives on his own in his 80s. And somebody got him a cell phone and showed him how to send texts, and he literally prank texts the whole town. Everybody in town knows him. He knows everybody in this town. Never did get married, okay, but he did learn how to golf. He did learn how to drive. He learned how to travel the world. And notice the delays on the ages. And he's still maybe not the best driver, although research shows autistic drivers are better than neurotypical drivers at everything except for left turns for some reason. And his routines are still really rigid, and he travels the world by himself. He still likes to be by himself a lot. But he's doing this. Now, what happened? He was taken out of that insane asylum and placed with a foster family on a farm. And Donald was allowed to work and take risks, and he was put into public school, and he was allowed to work and take risks. And Donald was able to keep taking those risks and be allowed to experience the consequences of those risks in a place that accepted him and supported him. When they went down, the Atlantic reporters went down to try and report on Donald. All of the townsfolk were like, whoa, hey, you're going to be nice to Donald, right? Donald ain't stupid, Donald's smart. And they were like very clear that this was going to be a positive article about Donald if they were going to do it. But he was able to do it. And again, all I'm trying to say is we don't know how people are going to turn out. It's impossible to know. So let me point out a couple quotes that have shaped my work and has helped me with this. One, whoever does the work does the learning. This is from my last life as a junior high teacher. Who's doing the work in our child's life? We become experts on a lot of things they need to learn how to do. I remember talking to a parent who her child had autism and all these dietary restrictions. And finally, she hit on Eggo waffles. He will eat Eggo waffles every morning for the rest of his life and love that. And so, and he didn't have good gross motor skills and wasn't terribly safe. So she cut up his Eggo waffles when he was a kid. And she found herself one morning when her son was 15, talking on the phone with friends saying, "Oh, I got to go cut up my son's waffle." And the friend's like, "What? Why are you cutting up his waffle?" In her mind, she's like, "Because I've always done it." And then she's like, "Why am I cutting up my son's waffles?" And so much of what we do is cutting up waffles that we don't need to do all the time. We gradually want to hand the work over to the person. The other quote I want to share is Dr. Peter Gearhart, who's an expert on transition and autism on the East Coast. "Is this outcome more the result of their diagnosis or more the result of their never having been taught a reasonable cohort of actual living skills?" Again, there's nothing in autism or any of these disabilities that says you can't learn to do laundry. My mom made me do laundry from the time I was 12. I had to cook my own meals for breakfast I had to cook my own meals at least once a day from the time I was 14. And again, did I do some dumb stuff? Oh my goodness, I can tell you stories of times I nearly burned the kitchen down. And times I burned myself with oil, and times I burned myself with hot caramel, and all kinds of wonderful things I've done. And yet, I'm a good cook today. So the bottom line is that the dignity of risk stems from the power of self-determination and the right to self-determination, to free agency, to autonomy. And a good rule of thumb is ask yourself, what choices are non-disabled people allowed to make, even if it's a stupid choice? How many stupid choices do we allow people to make each and every day? And yet a free society is a society where people can make stupid choices. And hopefully most of the time not die and not go to prison, but sometimes that has to happen too. And sadly, that's how it goes. Self-determination is the freedom to live as one chooses and decide for oneself without consulting others. It's about letting people pick what they're going to work on, what they want to achieve, and giving them back that control, because our job as caregivers is not to decide what everyone should be working on or what is best for them, or to trump their decisions because we know better or we don't like what they're choosing. Our job is to ensure that the supports are in place as people exercise their autonomy, and to try and do that in a way that will maximize their growth. And that's the balancing act, right? We also have a duty to care, and especially those of us who are parents or guardians or, I'm a behavior analyst, we ethically have to care. But one thing people get stuck on is they think duty to care means we have to keep this person 100% safe all the time. That's not the duty of care. The duty of care means to not neglect the person. It was actually put into the law and into the ethics to help get away from negligence. It's that we don't harm them. And sometimes by not letting them choose, we're harming them. All it is a reasonable standard of watchfulness, attention, and caution, okay? So under many forms of the laws, and I haven't looked up Utah's, but I meant to, duty of care trumps dignity of risk only when there is a threat of death or permanent serious disability. That is the only time that we really have to step in and stop them from their decision. Child's running into traffic, there is a threat of death or permanent serious disability. We have to stop them. But does that mean we never teach them how to cross the street? So duty of care does not mean infantilization. Oh, but they're just a 3-year-old in a 24-year-old's body, okay? People with disabilities, this is not helpful at all. And we're not. I'm not some, 16-year-old trapped in an adult body. I'm me with 40 plus years of experience. And yeah, some things that I still don't do as well as 16-year-olds. Duty of care doesn't mean we have to protect a person from themselves or that they're safe at all times. It does mean that we teach, we push, we mentor, we trust, and we care. We have a duty of care and we do care about them, but because we care about them, we don't just bubble wrap them and put them under a glass and in a safe little crystal prison for their whole lives. It means we support self-determination. So what do we do then? We have to first have an ability mindset. We assume that this person can learn to do this. Maybe they don't know how to do it now, but inherently there's some way they can learn to do this for themselves. And that should be the assumption until totally proven wrong. Once it's completely proven wrong, again, there are options there up to and including guardianship. But assuming ability helps so much. The other thing we've got to be able to do is up our own tolerance for risk, realizing that no risk equals no reward. They're not going to have success if they can't risk. we also need to build in reasonable supports, make it safe to fail as much as possible. It means a deference to preference. This person may want things or like things or choose to use their money or choose their friends in a way we think is terrible. And if it's not going to result in death or serious permanent disability, we might have to let them do it. Because here's the key. Self-determination is shown to lead to self-reliance, which is shown to lead to self-discipline, which is shown to lead to self-esteem, which is where dignity comes in. The dignity comes because somebody in our life allowed us to make choices, rely on ourselves, make mistakes, learn to discipline ourselves, kick our hard, right? And then we have self-esteem because we did hard stuff and we screwed up and we learned from it and now we're doing better. And there's a dignity to that, that we don't want anyone to take away from us as much as we've often made dumb choices, right? I never thought I would do a presentation where I quoted Britney Spears ever in my entire life, okay? But if you've seen the whole Free Britney thing, which is apparently the only thing that a majority of Americans can agree upon in the last 6 or 8 years, listening to her talk about her conservatorship, I actually had a video of her first and I was like, I can't stand this. I can't watch this. So I just have her quotes here. But listening to her talk about how she had a guardianship for 13 years and she wasn't even allowed, like something like, oh, I've had cash for the first time in my life, an ATM card. I can go to the store and buy candles, which have fire and all this, like something nobody else had done. I have keys to my car again. I can talk to people I want to talk to again. I can go where I want to go again. I don't have to get permission for every single little act in my life anymore. And she just is so happy and said, you know, it's these little things that just make the hugest difference. And so grateful for being free now. Now, is Britney Spears, spoiler alert, going to make some terrible decisions in the future? Of course she will. She's Britney Spears. She had an album called Oops, I Did It Again, right? So she's going to, but so are the rest of us, right? So we want to affirm autonomy. And I'm not going to go through this because we spent a lot of time on supported decision-making, but the resources are there. I encourage you to look into it because I've seen too many adults whose guardianships default to the state of Utah, who then end up in really awful situations, or even have a well-meaning guardian. I've seen ones where the sibling was guardian and it didn't work out well for anybody. Are there times for guardianships? You better believe it. You better believe it. But how would you want to live? How much freedom would you want to have versus somebody watching over you? Even if there's areas of our lives where we chronically make some bad choices, right? I'm gonna go home tonight and well, I'm gonna home after this and I'm probably eating a pizza for lunch. Is that smart when I'm 46? Probably not. I'm gonna do it anyway, you know? And if I want to have dessert at lunch, I'm gonna do it because I'm 46, dang it, and I bought that dessert. And I might even call up my mom and let her know, hey, I had dessert at lunch today, and I might not even eat dinner tonight. And it's cool because I'm a grown-up and I can do that now. But think about it, right? All of us had someone who let us take risks and who stretched us to be able to handle those risks and help push us just enough out of our comfort zone that we could do it. This is what's called the loving push. And this is the basis of our philosophy at Scenic View Academy, but this is also a great book by Temple Grandin. But think about getting pushed and how it maybe didn't feel so great at the time. And maybe it felt really scary to be out on your own. And yet the people who supported us, even when, you know, we were out there trying to make those decisions, made all the difference. I love Temple Grandin's quote here. I think sometimes parents and teachers fail to stretch kids. My mother had a very good sense of how to stretch me just slightly outside my comfort zone. Parents need to let go and give careful, loving pushes to get their child to try new things. And that's just the key over and over. Temple was severely disabled by a lot of metrics. Temple is a PhD animal scientist at the University of Colorado to this day. And I love her to death. Sorry, I missed her when she was up there at the hub. So what is the loving push? It's saying, okay, we all have a comfort zone and we all have a danger zone where there's just too many demands on our skills, but we all have a growth zone somewhere in between those two. And this is called in the research, the zone of proximal development, or the ZPD. We're all gonna feel anxious as we move into the growth zone because we're not 100% certain, but that is how growth happens. And all of the research says that the common denominator of success is getting stretched into the ZPD, right? So it looks like this. Here's the person, and they're lovingly pushed just a little bit out of their comfort zone into that growth zone. Now, if we push into the danger zone, we'll know it. And we need to back off a bit, and we need to help, and we need to put in some more supports But gradually, what happens to that comfort zone? It expands, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I can do things now I couldn't have dreamed of doing as an autistic young adult, even in my 20s. And I know that's going to be the case 20 years from now. I'm still learning, I'm still growing. Autism is developmental delay. But the beauty of that is that they also can't find any cases of someone with autism who also got Alzheimer's. So there's some advantages too. With the support of loving pushes, we can do stuff. Now, I don't have time. I'm not going to show this video. This is Ben Stiller's public service announcement on shaken man-child syndrome. It's really hysterical. Watch it. But we do need to lovingly push and allow people that dignity of risk that comes with that. Because if they can't do it, who's going to do it for them? Needs to be the mantra we repeat to ourselves as we look at the future for our kids. If they can't do it, who's going to do it for them? And again, if they can't drive, great. Okay, so what's that going to look like? Like Taylor was saying, it's Uber, it's public transportation, it's cabs, it's buses, it's carpools. We need to start prioritizing more and more the adaptive skills, things that are going to work throughout every area of life and reduce dependence and allow the risk that's required for mastering these skills. There's a great place in downtown Salt Lake where they have a wood shop that's run completely by blind people, all of them using power tools that freak the crud out of me. That's a dignity of risk you can't even believe, and those people have an amazing self-esteem. They also make fun of those of us with eyes who walk in there and freak out because it's pitch black all the time too. Anyway, top 7 transition areas. We need to plan for all of these, right? And that means there's going to be risks involved with employment, risks involved with education, risks involved with community participation, transportation, money management, friendships, social skills, sexuality, identity, risks involved with fun. Of course there's going to be. Are you feeling overwhelmed by this? Well, here's some tips. Okay, know and use your resources. There's so many out there. There's more at the hub. I'm happy to answer questions. Lots more people are too. Focus on one area at a time. Learn from people who've been there before. Know rights. Watch for natural teaching opportunities, natural opportunities to give someone some risk. And don't overlook sexuality. I get asked to speak all over the country. And the number one thing I get asked to speak on by neurotypical groups is sexuality, which is the weirdest thing in the world to me. And I can tell you stories all day about how weird some of that's been, but it's worth it too, because it's a big deal. Sexuality is a place where the dignity of risk and transition critical, all of those places come, self-determination, all of that comes to the absolute apex, because this is where I've seen the most problems with adulthood. And yet having a guardianship and having somebody else tell you who you can date and when you can date and where you can go and how that's going to work and whether or not you can get married, I wouldn't have wanted that with my relationships. But start immediately with this and know it's going to be imperfect. It's going to take time, but you can't ignore this risk, okay? Because ignoring the risks of talking about sexuality and preparing for the person to assume those risks actually increases the odds that the person will be sexually abused or exploited. And I can show you the stats. We've got to back up our loving pushes and our risk with direct skills instruction too. So Temple talks about, this is my bragging about getting hugged by Temple Grandin picture, but Temple talks about how we end up overprotecting. We don't expose students to enough hands-on and enough trades, enough basic life skills. And instead of letting them risk these things, what are we doing? Well, we're filling their lives with safe stuff like screens. Is that really safe? Is that really? I've seen more risks involved with screens than with most of the things people are trying to protect their kids from. By the way, buy this book. I don't get paid for it, but if you don't own a copy of The Loving Push, you should buy it. So her key critical components of helping us get past this is being able to teach the person to avoid learned helplessness, become resilient, and to have the right mentors. And that's what I'm saying. If we're going to value the dignity of risk and we're going to allow people to become adults, we have to switch from being always in parent mode to becoming in mentor mode, right? We give that loving push and we say, hey, I know the game you're trying to play. And with me as your coach, I know you can win. You're here to help them win at being a successful, independent adult, whatever that maximized life looks for them. It's going to look different than Taylor's. It's going to look different than mine. It's going to look different than anyone else because newsflash, everyone with autism and other neurodiversities is incredibly unique, and our futures are going to look incredibly unique. But if we can learn to prime them, like Taylor was saying with the smoke alarms and the fire drills, cue them, teach them, and use questions, not control, lovingly give the feedback, then we can not only help mentor them, but then we can become a mentor for others. Again, I could spend the whole time on mentors. Without a loving push, those of us with disabilities get overprotected, and we honestly get disabled, like that butterfly breaking out of the chrysalis. Unable to decide or act, quick to give up and make excuses. The whole concept of executive functioning and executive functioning deficits, I find, is kind of a red herring, because as I work with youth, it's almost always a result of them never, ever having been given enough decision-making opportunities. So what can we do? Number one, expect transition. I'm not going to go through the research, but the research is all saying that our expectations that the person can do for themselves is directly correlated with them being able to do for themselves. And then, like I said, tip 2 here, let them make more decisions and learn from them. Help them take responsibility for everything you can, because eventually we're going to have to hand over all these responsibilities. And it's better to find out earlier that, oh yeah, they do need power of attorney in this area or something like that, if that's not going to work out, right? But allow them to keep learning and to demonstrate increasing levels of independence, decreasing the prompts. This is what making it safe to fail is about, is allowing those decisions. Remember, when we're aiming for success, where does success come from? Well, success means that we have the behaviors of the success, which means we made good decisions, right? Well, where did good decisions come from? Well, people who make good decisions often come because they have experience. Well, where does experience often come from? How many times is it our bad decisions, right? Let them make decisions. Tip 3, let them fail. Help them want stuff and be willing to fail. It's impossible to live without failing unless you live so cautiously, you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default, says J.K. Rowling. Consider the risk of not taking risks. How disabling is that? What kind of quality of life is that, right? If I had time, I'd tell you about my definition of failure here. I redefined failure so that it didn't feel so overwhelming to me, and it's helped me my whole life because I still hate failing. But to me, failing is when I give up on something I still really, truly want. And I love Neil Gaiman here, talking to graduates, his high school commencement. Go make interesting mistakes, make amazing mistakes, make glorious and fantastic mistakes. We all need to do it. Tip 4, we got to expose people more broadly. Again, let them take risks and try new weird things. Why does every kid with autism want to be a video game designer? Because guess what they've been exposed to? Video games. They all want to be a YouTube producer or an influencer because of that. And then we also need to teach them resiliency. I'm not going to go through all this, but basically, everybody messes up. When we mess up with autism, Temple Grandin says that we perseverate on it, we personalize it, and we make it permanent. We think, oh my gosh, this is not just this area of my life I failed everywhere. And it's not just now, but it's forever. And it's not just I did something bad, I'm bad. And we get stuck on that, and we need people to help us through that. But we can learn to crash and to crash our way to success and develop a crash helmet and be able to crash faster and recover more quickly. And we can build a pit crew around us who can help us when we crash and who can teach us the systems to get back up and try again, because so much of life is failing and trying again. No shame, no blame, no excuses, right? This is where resiliency comes from. It's the difference between dropping a glass on a tile floor and dropping a rubber ball on the tile floor. We need to build in cognitive flexibility and resiliency for the person to be able to assume a quality of life and to live their life. We're gonna all fall off the cliff, right? Most of your kids have fallen off the first cliff already. It's called the 22 cliff or the IDEA cliff. When you're out of high school, you don't get IEPs, you don't get government services anymore. You still fall under ADA and stuff, but things change. The second cliff is when the parent can no longer care for the child for whatever reason. And as Dr. Gearhart said, it's like giving someone a wheelchair on a 1-month rental, and at the end of the month, they have to give it back and walk. Are they going to be able to walk? Well, that's our job, is to help them be able to walk at some point. In a metaphorical sense here, are they going to be able to run their lives when all of these cares go away? How do we do that? We help them maximize, because walking is going to look different for everyone. So often people say, well, I want my child to be normal, or I want them to look normal, act normal, have normal things. It's like, well, that's not the goal. Trying to normalize a kid is not the goal. The goal is to maximize the individual, right? Normalization says disability is wrong, it's something that needs to be fixed or gotten rid of, and they need to look the same as everybody else. Maximization says, okay, this person has a disability, let's accept them for who they are, let's find out where they want to go, and let's actualize that potential. Let's grow their capacities as an autistic person. Normalization says, how can they become the best approximation of everybody else and make everybody around them feel good? And maximization says, how can they become their best self and achieve their best future, as unique as that's going to be? Maximization is the goal, and it doesn't mean doing everything alone. Part of maximizing is also building in support networks, but notice who's running the support network. Ultimately, we want the autistic individual, the neurodiverse individual, to be at the center and to run this support network, to gradually hand this over. And the parents then move from being that center square, that center circle, to being part of the network on the outside of people who will help empower that person to do amazing, incredible things. And again, if I had time, I could go on and tell you story after story of the hundreds of adults I've worked with over the years. Have they all turned out amazing? No, some of them are in jail right now. But guess what? They're living a life. And even those that are in prison, when they come out, I think they're going to have a better life for it and for what they've learned. So conclusions. I just hope people can get past our preconceived limitations. And again, that often came from a very honest place of seeing our children at their worst. We can acknowledge that autism is not some lifelong death sentence. And if we can start planning, what is this going to look like to start allowing more risk and allowing them to succeed in transition into independence and adulthood? Focus on the strengths. Success is not going to come from weaknesses. I ain't going to get very far looking at my terrible basketball skills, no matter how much I work on them. Doesn't matter to me, right? Surrender the one up, especially as they get older. We need to start handing more and more control over to the person, allowing them to make more decisions, asking with questions rather than approaching with questions rather than control. Help them develop support networks, aim for a quality of life, realize there is no perfect life. Nobody has perfect outcomes, and have that marathon mindset. We're not in a sprint. This isn't going to happen overnight. Every time frame is unique, but little by little, we can maximize the person. And along the way, we need to involve them in all their treatment decisions. So keep pushing, keep lovingly stretching them in their zone of proximal development. Let them take some risks. Help create optimal challenges, that safe to fail stuff, where it's like just enough of a challenge that it's got to push them a little out of their comfort zone, but not so much of a challenge that it's overwhelming or destroying them. And risk by risk and challenge by challenge, they're going to grow. Temple Grandin, and Deborah Moore, her co-author, we realize it's difficult for some parents to push their children, especially when the kids resist, everyone's tired, and the outcome is not guaranteed. But it's one of the greatest gifts anyone can give a child, give anybody. I'm glad people allowed me to make dumb choices. I could go on all day about the dumb choices I have made and will probably make in the future. But our futures are ours, and those dumb choices are ours. And denying someone the ability to have those experiences may not be how we want to work with those that we really love and care about. I don't know how better to say that. So the dignity of risk is going to look different for each person, but let's allow it as much as we possibly can and be grateful that someone allowed us that. Our society is so risk averse now that we're losing our chance to even be full, free individuals. Anyway, I'm done, and it's time for lunch here. It's 1:30. So that's when Amy told me to be finished. But if you want to contact me again, like I'm happy to share the slides. I'm happy to talk more, whatever you want to talk about. But there's my email address too. Anyway, thanks so much. I'm gonna stop sharing.
Oh, thank you so much, Jared. That was wonderful. I love listening to Jared speak. He's one of my favorites. So yeah, I hope that you guys, well, does anybody have any questions or anything that you want to ask at this point? We're doing okay. So, like I said, I'm planning on being in the office on Tuesday. So if anybody wants help with a SAMi account, getting a SAMi account set up, or applying for that barrier relief thing, we can do that on Tuesday. And we, December 15th and 16th, we'll be doing Medicaid applications and working with a Medicaid navigator. And hopefully we can get people signed up for the home clinic if they aren't already. And if you're interested in that and having a healthcare case manager that can help you with all of that. So anyway, thank you so much to everybody. And I really, really, really appreciate your time. And if you guys liked this, and I'm going to post it on YouTube, but then also if you guys like this, we can do this kind of a parent training like every 6 months or at least once a year or whatever. I think it's beneficial as a mom. So anyway, Thank you so much, you guys, and y'all have a good weekend and a good Thanksgiving next week, and we will see y'all later.
Thank you so much.
Thank
This was
you.
great.
You bet. Thank you.